Hello everyone, welcome back into another stream. Hope you're doing well. So, yesterday we finished our playthrough of the PlayStation 1 classic game called Alundra, a kind of Zelda clone. So I figured, since we played a Zelda clone, why not first come back with the reacts to a video that talks about clones in gaming? And of course, clones in this sense means more like game clones, not like literal clones or anything like that. So that's where we're going to start. So the first video I have queued up for tonight will be "Clones Aren't Killing Gaming; They're Saving It" by Adam Millard, the architect of games. I honestly don't remember if I put this in the playlist or somebody else had suggested I add it, but it's kind of ironic that it was in the list that I hadn't gotten to yet. So after that, I figured we can go into "How Game Reviews Affect Your Perception" by Daryl Talks Games. I don't believe I've watched any videos by these two channels yet, so I'm very curious to see how they go. I know Daryl Talks Games has another video somewhere on my playlist. And speaking of which, I made a bit of a mistake earlier today when I was trying to rearrange things and sort things on my playlist. So if I actually do this and like sort the playlist, I can't undo it. So pretty much all of the videos that I had queued up in chronological order of what I've reacted to on stream just got completely reshuffled, and it would have taken so much longer than I would have cared to do to like put everything back together. I tried to just remove all of the ones that I've already watched and just kept this list smaller. So I'm thinking now on I will just kind of prune these videos from my playlist so that way I don't have to keep scrolling down every time, and there's no like really good sort function. I guess I could have like moved things up to the top, but I didn't really think about it. The thing that really annoys me about the playlist functionality is that there's no sort option for like when I added it into the playlist, because that would have made things a lot easier. Even though I don't always watch things in the order that I put them in the playlist, at the very least I could group things together a bit more consistently, at least for me. So anyway, that's not too important. So after those two videos, which are more general gaming topics, I figured we can dive back into the Elden Ring lore with Honored Madman's "How Marika Betrayed Maliketh." And this is a topic that is very interesting to me because I don't believe we do have a very good picture of this. I'm very much on the fence about how I feel about all this stuff, and I figure the DLC will not touch on it at all and just bring up more questions when that comes around. So if Honored Man has anything to elucidate us, I am very eager to see it. So after that, we have a kind of related topic with "Where Was Farum Azula Before Its Ruin" by the Elden Conspiracy. I think we watched maybe one video by them. I don't really remember too well. I'm pretty bad about that, to be honest. But yeah, I have some thoughts about this, but again, I'm on the fence. So it's, fine to look at videos which are going to be on contentious topics. So I'm very curious to see how these two are going to handle these topics respectively. And then potentially to close off the night, depending on how much time we take to go through all of these videos, I have a Crucible Knight analysis, "The Strongest Warrior in Elden Ring" by Ontos. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. So I have not watched any videos by them, but I'm pretty sure this must have been suggested to me, maybe not. So those are the videos I kind of have queued up for tonight. The other ones further down the list aren't in order. I just kind of go and wing it. So don't pay too much attention to that. So anyway, hi Puppy. Hope you guys are all doing well. Ask Next, nice to see you again. Chris F. Chadwick, nice to see you. I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, we're done with that, Scowl Easy. Done with Alundra. You played Laundry back in the day? Good game? Yeah. Alright. So, let's go ahead and dive on into our first video of the night with "Clones Aren't Killing Gaming; They're Saving It" by Adam Millard, the architect of games.
Okay, here's a question. What did
All right, and let me know how the volume balance is for you guys, because it's a little bit different for me. I can't exactly hear the way that you guys hear things.
people call first-person shooters before they called them first-person shooters? Now, you might be thinking, quite fairly, that FPS is a genre name and a broad description.
Why is this so dark? Did I press a button somewhere? It's not the right button. It's terrible. Video override? Allow for a different caption style if specified by the video. Oh, interesting. This is super gray. I don't know how it looks for you guys, but this is not how I usually see it. I'm just going to press a bunch of buttons and hopefully that will change things. Oh, that must be mute.
1993 all the way up to around the year 2000.
Oh, that's weird. K and L doing all that.
Before
J backs it up. Okay. Sorry for that. All right, hold on. I have to... Wait, what did I just do? Oh, I put it all the way down there. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry for all these technical difficulties. All right, anyway. Sounds clear? All right, thank you. Give the dog a hug. He's being a little bit of a troublemaker right now. He doesn't want to lie down for the night, apparently. All right, here we go.
Okay, here's a question. What did people call first-person shooters before they called them first-person shooters?
I'm going to guess, like, Doom clones? Quake clones? Based off of, like, the title?
Now, you might be thinking, quite fairly, that FPS as a genre name and a broad description of a type of game is kind of a no-brainer, right? They're games where you shoot, and they're in first person. What other possible name could you need? Well, for half a decade, from 1993 all the way up to around the year 2000, the predominant terminology for a game where you shoot in first person wasn't first-person shooter, but Doom clone.
Hey, good guess. No, I don't remember that at all, to be honest. Although, yeah, it's... Maybe I would like need to look back at some of those super old Nintendo Power magazines or Game Informers. Just because, like, I feel like the lexicon, or at least my awareness of the lexicon, wasn't as advanced as it is now. I mean, but that's because, like, a lot of information is just kind of, like, collated online at this point. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I did not... This would not have occurred to me.
Seems bizarre now, but back in the day, id Software's Doom was so popular that it was basically the sole definition for the early FPS genre, and almost every other proto-first-person shooter was ultimately inspired by and judged relative to Doom. It was that all-encompassing, even if it wasn't actually the first FPS. Everything from Blood to Quake and all the terrible knockoffs in between, basically every shooter from that era was to a greater or lesser degree, more or less just Doom with different graphics and levels. It wasn't just that shooters...
And I don't really blame them for saying that they're Doom clones, because Doom definitely has a specific visual style that was just kind of a product of its graphics and the technology of its time. So I don't really feel like, even though Doom is technically an FPS, it just feels very different from what I envision an FPS to be. Obviously, I'm speaking more of like the original Doom, not like the most recent one.
Shooters not similar to Doom wouldn't sell, although that was definitely true, is that Doom had such a massive cultural presence that games that didn't follow its template felt almost wrong. And it wasn't until Half-Life came out, coincidentally as around the same time Doom clone as a term started falling off, that the FPS genre as a whole was finally able to move out of Doom's shadow, and even...
Yeah, I think that's true. Half-Life really was the kind of turning point for a lot of ways in gaming, just because, like, it really offered a 3D experience rather than the pseudo 3D experience through 2D visuals. Now, obviously, when you're looking at a screen, it's always going to be 2D, but I mean, there's a certain amount of depth and all that's actually present within Half-Life that's different than, like, essentially moving a pseudo screen per, like, frame, like, when you're moving. I explained that poorly, but hopefully you guys pick what up I'm saying. Wolfenstein was before Doom, right? No, Wolfenstein is part of Doom, I'm pretty sure. So, like, Doom came out extremely early. I would need to, like, check out the timeline, but yeah. Wait, Wolfenstein does predate Doom? Alright, now I gotta look this up. Oh yeah, I could do it on this monitor.
And then Half-Life...
Wolfenstein. What was the first one even called? It's gonna be maybe just original. 1981. Holy crap. I did not realize Wolfenstein is that old. All right, now may as well check out Doom. 1993. Yes, 12 years. Holy crap. Yeah, I don't even remember actually seeing the original Wolfenstein, to be honest. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. For some reason, like, in my mind, I always conflate the two just because they are so similar. So I think I must have played either Wolfenstein or Doom when I was extremely young. Ironically enough, it was on one of the computers at my mom's work. And on the weekends, she would occasionally take us with her to like work while most people were out of the office and whatnot. And that way she wouldn't need to like pay for a babysitter or anything like that. And so it's like one of my very earliest gaming memories. So it might have been Doom because I don't really like the Nazi stuff doesn't stick out to my mind when I was a kid, but the face does. So maybe I was just too young to really understand the whole Nazi symbolism and whatnot. Thanks for letting me know that. You wonder what the Souls-like genre will be called if we ever move past the Doom clone stage. I feel like Souls-like has stuck in it's kind of funny to talk about because like Sekiro always gets forgotten. Like, is it a Souls-like? Is it not? So Souls-like, I think, is reserved for like a specific type of game because I would say like Lords of the Fallen is a Souls-like, but I wouldn't necessarily go quite so far as to say that Sekiro is, even though it really kind of is. But yeah, Commodore 64. There were wolf levels in Doom as Doom 2 as secret levels as well. Okay, you played it when you were doing volunteer time. Nice. All right, let's go on back to the video.
Life still has Doom's health systems, a comparable weapon toolkit, and even a similar setting and plot. That's just how influential Doom was, and how widespread cloning it became. Now, the idea that the original Doom is an important piece of video gaming history probably isn't very surprising. So, why am I talking about this weird piece of 20th century trivia that started before I was even born? Well, it's because in the modern day, where there are an ever-increasing number of games coming out every year, and there's an extra 3 decades of history to draw from, cloned video games that copy an existing title are more prevalent and influential than ever before. Roguelikes and Metroidvanias, for example, mainstays of the indie scene, are two enduringly popular genres that are primarily based around endless mimicry of a single highly influential title, Rogue and Super Metroid respectively. In the AAA space, practically everyone is trying to flat out have a second go at their old titles and give them a fresh spin, and the industry as a whole is still reeling from many failed attempts to copy the big multiplayer heavy hitters of Overwatch, Fortnite, and Minecraft, all.
And it's kind of funny to me how many games are kind of being revamped, recycled, remade, or remastered. But I mean, I guess that shouldn't be too surprising when cinema has been doing the same thing for decades. So I kind of want to make a video about that, but I'm still like in the early need to do a lot more research kind of phases there. Scaleezy says, Souls-like is defined by stamina-based combat for Sekiro to truly count, but being made by From, it gets a pass. Sad what happened to Overwatch? Agreed.
All 3 of which are themselves blatant clones of existing games. If you look closely enough at the modern-day gaming ecosystem, you will see almost nothing but clones, and from this it's easy to come to the conclusion that we've entered a dark age of creatively bankrupt repetition. However, I'm not convinced that's actually what's happening. While some copied games absolutely are transparent, lazy attempts to cash in on the hard work of someone else, or to blindly chase a trend, clones also serve a valuable role in the greater artistic ecosystem of the medium, and not only that.
Yeah, I agree completely with the idea that clones are overall good for gaming because a clone isn't necessarily a clone because it's a one-to-one thing. Clones can be better than the originals in that they drive innovation. So one of the most recent games that I've played, which you could kind of call like a clone of Dark Souls, is obviously Lords of the Fallen. And it's still too early to see what, if any, effect it's going to have on the greater sphere of gaming. But I think one of the strongest things that Lords of the Fallen could offer FromSoft is the incorporation of like the wither mechanic, as well as the posture meter being incorporated on the target lock on. Like those two things are so small, but add a huge amount of depth and variety to combat. So, some other good clones that helped redefine everything. So you could say that like Battlefield and Call of Duty in some ways are like Halo clones or Medal of Honor clones, probably more like Medal of Honor. But Call of Duty innovated by having ADS be way more incorporated naturally into the game, having like grenade indicators. Maybe, I mean, my knowledge of FPS isn't the best, and maybe this isn't the best example, but Half-Life pushed things a certain way. Halo, I guess Half-Life and Halo aren't clones. It really just depends on like how much you want to define as a clone, but I don't know. Yeah. Souls also popularized New Game Plus cycles. I disagree with that strongly. And while you'd rather RPG games not cheaply slap them on as fan service when it doesn't do anything outside of inflating HP/damage, you think having more series experiment with the mechanic is overall a good thing. So New Game Plus has been a feature in gaming for an extremely long time, although you might be right to an extent that New Game Plus became more seen like more as like an actual feature, but I mean, I'm trying to remember if the original Star Ocean for the Super Famicom had New Game Plus, but I'm pretty confident Star Ocean 2 did. I believe Tales of Destiny and the Tales of games had New Game Plus cycles as well. Chrono Trigger, of course. I can't believe that one slipped my mind. Yeah, that one's a huge example because you could use each new game cycle to try to go for a different ending. Yeah.
That, they've been around since the very beginning of video games. While sequels can take some of the credit for pushing video games forwards, I think the true engine that drives the progress of the medium lies in clones, whether made by the same studio as the original or by a completely different third party. It's only by understanding the important role that clones play and learning how to distinguish a good, useful clone from a bad, pointless one that we can understand why clones need to exist and why some games that seem like total rip-offs can manage to feel fresh and unique, whereas others that go out of their way to seem different end up feeling like you've already played them before. Nowhere is the tricky and sometimes unintuitive nature of video game clones more apparent than in the case of Souls-likes, another genre defined by a single video game series that
it's kind of ironic that he talks about Souls because of how much the channel focuses on that. So maybe somebody else had recommended this video to me. That would make a lot of sense. But yeah, if you really think about it, like Dark Souls is a Demon Souls clone made by the same company, but they innovated it in such a way that it actually became like genre defining. Like they were able to take a certain concept and transform it into actually being good. And I think in many ways you could definitely say all of the Mega Man games are clones of the prior Mega Man games, and then eventually they kind of like cooked it up so well that people got sick of it. But I don't know.
a bunch of people have tried to replicate with pretty limited success. Just in 2023, and only considering larger games, we've had Jedi Survivor, Lords of the Fallen, Remnant 2, and Lies of P, all games which could be very generously called homages to the works of FromSoft, each one featuring bonfires, recharging healing, stamina management, an emphasis on big boss fights, and non-linear level design. Each one of these games knowingly and obviously rip off the FromSoft catalogue of games, with most of them trying to add their own twist. Remnant has its huge focus on range combat, Jedi Survivor is all about simplified cinematic Star Warsing, and Lords of the Fallen has its very creative two worlds mechanics. The only one of these games that doesn't really have its own standout gimmick is Lies of P, a game I found to be incredibly derivative of Bloodborne. Lies of P steals everything from Bloodborne's aggressive health recovery to its absence of shields, and even a lot of its enemy designs. Hell, a lot of the environments look pretty damn similar, as do both games' obligatory level up waifu dolls. The only thing Lies of P doesn't steal from Bloodborne is its parrying system, and that's just nicked from Sekiro. However, in spite of this blatant plagiarism, Lies of P was the only one of 2023's FromSoft clones that I ended up sticking with, and crucially, the only one I didn't spend my entire playtime with unfavourably comparing to the proper Souls games, even though it reminded me the most of them. And I think the reason why this is that while Lies of P certainly isn't an original game, it's the only one that uses its status as a clone to its full potential. So, What do I mean by that? Well,
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of beauty into something being able to take a good look at themselves in the mirror and admit to themselves that they're a derivative clone and just kind of like roll with it. Because, I mean, you can't really criticize them on that front when they've already accepted about themselves. And that's just kind of like one way to deal with like negative criticism. You're like, okay, yeah, you're right. I don't care. What now? You know? And so if you're willing to embrace what you put out there, there's a certain authenticity that comes with it than trying to put on a different coat of paint and say something is different than it actually is, I think, in some ways. And since we're talking about Lies of P, I may as well mention again for stream that I am considering doing, well, it's not really considering, I am going to do a playthrough of Lies of P very shortly here. Maybe sometime this week, maybe like Friday, I don't know. So yeah, I'll look into it a bit more and keep you guys posted on the details. And I'm going to go into that game blind. I know very little about it, so just mentioning that here. Hey, Morlord, welcome back to the stream. It's been a minute. A biased Bloodborne fan? Might as well just call that a Bloodborne fan. Alright. It's disingenuous to claim that it doesn't. I think he's just trying to like make some sweeping generalizations. But yeah, we'll see more.
I think the clones needn't be mere echoes of the games they copy. By using their position as clones to their advantage, many can stand shoulder to shoulder with their inspirations, and sometimes even surpass them, with the very best clones eventually shedding the label of clone entirely. If you ask me, the secret to a well-designed clone, like Lies of P, relies on understanding the idea that much like in any good sci-fi, while a clone might begin life as a simple copy, it will invariably develop a personality all of its own. And truly great clones embrace this fact rather than trying to stifle it. Look at a lot of retro nostalgia-based clones, for example, which often have a nasty habit of sticking too closely to their inspiration. Learning to chop off enemy limbs in the Callisto Protocol isn't anywhere near as fun when you've already done it in Dead Space and when you're missing your iconic plasma cutter. And Atomic Heart's knockoff Bioshock combat was pretty simplistic when I first saw it 15 years ago, and me already knowing all the overpower combos in advance has not done the format any favours. All too many developers of clone games, as well as players looking for more of the same, make the critical error of assuming that just because we like the original game, we'll automatically like something that's similar just as much. While this is certainly true to an extent, ultra-faithful clones often end up fighting a losing battle against our nostalgia. Wargroove is with one or two small
Was the translation the same in that version?
clones often end up fighting a
It's not by my hand that I am once again given
losing
flesh.
battle against
I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's like a super big mistranslation. Anyway, that's not too important right now. It just distracted me.
our nostalgia.
Hey,
Wargroove
Captain,
is,
welcome
with
back
one or
to
two
stream.
small exceptions, literally just Advance Wars with a fantasy skin, and Yooka-Laylee is a faithful clone of Banjo-Kazooie, complete with bad minigames and boring bosses. But the problem with these games is that people don't have nostalgia for Wargroove and Yooka-Laylee like they do for Advance Wars and Banjo-Kazooie. And so because these clones do nothing new, and make no attempt to distinguish themselves, there's virtually no reason to pick them over the originals. Instead of being a slave to the memory of a clone's inspiration, the best clones looking to forge their own path instead leverage these inevitable comparisons to highlight their uniqueness without giving up on the advantages of a player's existing familiarity.
Yeah, and I think using the Genshin Impact footage there was really good because everyone's like, oh, do you like Breath of the Wild? Well, then try out this game. Like, because it is, I mean, it's really very different from Breath of the Wild in many aspects. Even though I haven't played it, I know, like, that much at least. But it can be used to get somebody's foot in the door into checking out their game a bit more seriously. So yeah, with him talking about like nostalgia bait games and now like seeing Shovel Knight here, like one of the games that came to mind, which is a pretty good kind of like Metroidvania clone, is Cave Story. It's one of my like favorite games of all time, especially like knowing the story that it was developed by one dude. And so it just kind of like it's like the little game that could in my mind. So anyway, seeing Shovel Knight here just reminds me of that. What is it, man? A miserable pile of secrets, yeah. The mistranslation in the Dead Cells Castlevania DLC is intentional. It's a pretty infamous part of Symphony of the Night's history. Yeah, I mean, I'm not like too familiar with that stuff, but that's like one of the few things that I do actually know about Symphony of the Night. So just seeing it in a different format threw me for a loop.
Shovel Knight is the obvious king of this. It borrows extensively from games like DuckTales, Mega Man, and Castlevania, but it always makes sure to never directly reference them, and instead let fans experience the same ideas through the lens of some different gameplay styles, creating that warm feeling of familiarity without going head to head with any specific nostalgia. On the flip side, the Great Gravity Circuit directly references Mega Man X several times, both in visual style and by reusing some iconic Mega Man level design. However, the game only makes these comparisons when it's sure they can be used to highlight just how different Gravity Circuit's flexible, fast-paced movement mechanics are from its inspiration, creating.
That's interesting. I do have Gravity Circuit on my wish list. I just haven't gotten around to it because, I mean, the wish list is an ever-growing thing. So I've heard this is a good game. I am kind of like looking forward to playing it sometime eventually, but yeah, okay.
A clear point of comparison in Gravity Circuit's favour while still giving the game a nice nostalgic boost. This necessity of taking into account a player's existing level of familiarity also applies to more contemporaneous clones too. Look at any number of the seemingly endless clones of any popular indie game, like, I don't know, Vampire Survivors or Stardew Valley. As much as I might have liked Soulstone Survivors, a Vampire Survivors clone, or Coral Island, a slavish Stardew Valley clone, what little new stuff these games added to the formula.
It's very interesting to me to call it a Stardew Valley clone when Stardew Valley is just, Harvest Moon and all that.
Simply wasn't enough to keep my attention because I'd already seen all their tricks before and had essentially already mastered them before I'd even started playing. This was an issue I also ran into with Jedi Survivor, as well as its prequel, Fallen Order. The games make great use of Souls-like fundamentals to make exploration tense and fights nice and satisfying. Unfortunately, because the games really don't do all that much new beyond the obvious Star Wars aesthetic, particularly when it comes to combat, I couldn't help but slip into Souls-like routine and get bored of the battles very quickly because the games were completely unable to surprise me. A recurring boss fight against the guy who's all about big combo strings and magic that you've got to get good at parrying? Yep, I've seen him before, he's in Sekiro. That guy getting replaced by another similar guy who you thought was good towards the end of the game, who uses the same weapon but now he also has a gun. Weirdly enough, I've also seen that one before, also in Sekiro, as it happens. For the record, the Jedi games are actually really good, but because I've already played Sekiro and Dark Souls, and the games just don't do enough to justify their relationship outside of this comparison, to me, they'll only ever be a slightly more ambitious than normal clone. A clone established.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird thing to consider, but I feel like Jedi Survivor wasn't trying to make itself out to be a Dark Souls clone, even though some people feel that way. And to me, it's kind of somewhat similar to a more generic like platformer, but I mean it's not. So I don't really think the devs set out with that goal of being a Dark Souls clone as much as it was trying to incorporate semi-realistic combat, which is kind of what Dark Souls was trying to do. And in other ways, you could say like Dark Souls is a Dynasty Warriors or like a Musou clone, because like those games did that combat in that style kind of earlier, except the only difference between like Dynasty Warriors and Dark Souls is freaking every enemy in Dark Souls is on the level of a boss or a super boss in Dynasty Warriors almost. Yeah. You can reset your Vampire Survivors save if you want to start over from scratch. Jedi Survivor feels like all PS games, Uncharted, Tomb Raider, and so on? Maybe.
Establishing a unique identity isn't just a matter of being different from the game it's based on though. It also needs to define itself within a wider cultural context. Phrased less pretentiously, what that means is that clones, by virtue of being similar to something that people already know, are going to come pre-baked with some existing expectations from its source material, and a failure to take these into account can end up meaning that a clone will be unable to escape comparisons to its inspiration. Chasm and Sundered, for example, two Metroidvanias, try to shake up the format by having randomly generated worlds instead of fixed ones. However, this ruins the exploration-centric gameplay the fans of Metroid games like and expect, meaning that no matter how good these games are and how different they may have tried to be, they're always going to be associated with being a Metroid clone because they cloned Metroid so badly that it's impossible to escape. On the other hand, Hollow Knight manages to stand out by hitting all the requisite Metroid cornerstones, from exploration to movement-enhancing traversal abilities, but doing so in a way that feels uniquely visceral and epic compared to the relatively subdued original Metroid games, giving the game a unique identity, but within a framework that people expect. Many of the most well-known and most successful clones of all owe their success not to bold flashes of uniqueness, but simply to the fact that they excel at reinterpreting the expectations of their source material in a new and interesting way.
Yeah, and honestly, that is kind of a turnoff for me with Sea of Stars, because it seems that they really were just trying to bank on people's nostalgia for Chrono Trigger, which, I mean, it's a good game, it's a great game. I really enjoy Chrono Trigger, but I don't know, there just felt something a little disingenuous to me with the way that Sea of Stars was presented, and I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I don't know. Maybe like the trailers just didn't do enough of a job to make it seem as though the game is a bit more narratively driven, and that's kind of like the kicker for me. Like, it felt like Sea of Stars was like, hey guys, do you remember Chrono Trigger? Well, there's this game which is like Chrono Trigger, but I mean, one of the reasons why I really liked Chrono Trigger is because of its story, and there's like a reason why the game is kind of the way that it is, and you're doing what you're doing. It's like I didn't really get that sense with Sea of Stars, and I could just be wrong about how like it actually goes and everything, but I think it came out with like a little bit mixed reviews, and that kind of tempered my expectations or excitement for the game as well.
Enriching and distinguishing both games through the comparison. The excellent Chants of Sennar, for example, is heavily inspired by the equally good Heaven's Vault, with both games being about deciphering alien languages using broadly the same mechanics. However, Chants of Sennar opts for being a pure puzzler rather than a narratively focused adventure game, and this difference serves to contrast the two games while still providing the same kind of fun. And the new Final Fantasy VII games could have been a straight-up remake, but instead, they take the bold step of being kind of a commentary on the original game, staying true to their cinematic roots, whilst also providing a new, more action-centric perspective on the same ideas, meaning that both games retain their own unique identity, and you can get more out of one by playing the other to see what's different. For example, the ending of the remake is considerably more incomprehensibly batshit insane. By deliberately playing off elements of their source material that everyone expect, clones can take control of the cultural narrative that they were invariably going to be a part of anyway, and in doing so, carve out their own place within it. Hades, for example, reinterprets the core loop of endless death in a roguelike into the foundation for a completely linear and consistent narrative that spans multiple runs, and Desktop Dungeons reduces the same concepts to their absolute fundamentals, and in doing so becomes kind of a resource management puzzler. By the same token, Slipways clearly riffs off of the gameplay loop of classic Space Forex games like Master of Orion, but cuts out all the combat, creating...
I feel like this kind of overlooks a crucial factor with Hades at the very least, in that Hades has like actually amazing gameplay, and the story stuff, like, nobody would really care about it. Like, Hades is just a fantastic roguelike, but the fact that it does have a more linear story may be better for some people. And I think, as who just said it in chat, Scowleasy had said that they think a clone should be used for games that largely copy something one-to-one and get it right, with knockoff cheaply copying something without understanding it. Yeah. And with that kind of phrasing in mind, I would almost say like Dark Souls 2 feels like a Dark Souls knockoff rather than a Dark Souls clone. But of course, I'm very negative about Dark Souls 2, which I know is pretty controversial because a lot of people still seem to enjoy that game somehow. What was the difference between roguelite and roguelike again? One involves permanent upgrades and one doesn't. Wait. Are you saying that rhetorically there? The question? So yeah, a roguelite allows, it like gives you more permanent progression, or it doesn't completely set you down to zero. Whereas roguelike with a K is more unforgiving and a bit more similar to the original game of Rogue in that regard. Exactly, Morlor. You couldn't remember which was which? Okay.
the same kind of experience, but from a different point of view that couldn't exist without the original games. Conversely, many titles that fail to really meet the expectations of their predecessors or fit into the conversation ultimately end up failing as clones before they've even really gotten started. Humankind, as a clone of civilization, fails to give people the fun of historical role-playing with its ever-shifting factions, and so regardless of its merits as a game, this missing piece always stands out over everything else. And Starbound failed as a clone of Terraria because despite copying the core gameplay, stretching the premise over multiple planets could never be as compelling as getting to explore a single ever-changing world of Ray.
I don't know. I feel like Starbound and Terraria were in development at the same time. Although, I mean, Terraria is so old now, I don't exactly remember. I feel like there's probably some degree of parallel development, and they ended up being more similar to each other. And you could call like both of these like Minecraft clones, I think, or Minecraft knockoffs, because it's just a different version of it. Anyway, that's not too important.
Long period of time. This is kind of related to the problem I have with Remnant from the Ashes. It's a game that goes for the interesting gimmick of a Souls-like with ranged combat and design influences from looty-shooty games like Destiny. Unfortunately though, the missing elements of its inspiration ultimately hamstring the result. Because Remnant is all about shooty bang bang guns, enemies fail to feel anywhere near as satisfyingly lethal as in a Souls game because you can easily kill most before they can even react to you. The only way Remnant can make enemies remotely threatening is to make them huge bullet sponges that just run at you, or to have them spam loads of AoEs you need to run away from, neither of which are...
So, he's probably like speaking a bit more rhetorically here, but one thing that's kind of bothered me for a while in terms of like the design of FPS enemies is that they're very static, and I think turning to like Destiny 1 as an example of a mechanic which I think was brilliantly executed for an FPS was how the Vex's crit spots are like kind of in their chest rather than their head and whatnot. So you're not necessarily always incentivizing players to go for headshots. And to segue into like another related point based off of that, when you actually met the Cabal in Destiny 1, they had gigantic bodies that are covered in this freaking huge armor with these tiny little heads that have on these helmets. So if you shot off the helmet, that would kind of reveal their crit spot of their head, and then you could take them down way more easily than you could ever attempt to do with body shots. So I think that's a very core principle of that could be expanded upon to make an FPS genre even better, in that depending on what part of an enemy you shoot, that could potentially affect their AI as you move forward. So to give like another parallel example to help make this make a bit more sense, if we turn to an enemy like the Yin Yang or the Lost Number in Final Fantasy VII, there's the very common trope of like one enemy being like two bodies, but if you kill it with physical attacks, then it will have a second phase that becomes immune to physical attacks and can only be damaged with magic. I think you could potentially take that kind of idea and apply it to FPSs a bit more, where like if you need to manage ammo and whatnot, so like for the Destiny 2 or Destiny paradigm, you had primary ammo, special ammo, and like heavy ammo. That's not too important. My point is like maybe depending on what type of weapon you're killing an enemy with, it will drop a different type of ammo, or it will go into a like second phase that has like different mechanics associated with it. So I think there's a lot of ways that are available to kind of shake up the FPS experience, but devs haven't really tried to breach it as much as I think they could. And that could be for like a variety of reasons. I'm sure it would be absolute hell to try to like work on balancing all that. The bugs between phase transitions on the fly, all the animations, all that kind of stuff. Like gaming is a AAA development hell nowadays. You missed Destiny 1? Yeah. Did Vault of Glass have any hidden secret in the end? As far as like the lore, or like, I mean, there's always the raid boss and whatnot. Was Starbound not well received? So Starbound, it was just overshadowed. Like it's in a sense, like it is kind of a Terraria clone, which he was saying, but I think it was like the two games just kind of ended up being similar. From I forget the actual term for it, like parallel design and whatnot, but yeah, I think I only played like a little bit of Starbound, but the progression wasn't nearly as smooth as it felt to me as it was for Terraria, and so although I think Starbound's premise has much larger potential than Terraria's, I think Terraria's smoothness of the transition from the early game to the mid game to the late game is just miles beyond Starbound. But of course, this is I played Starbound, I don't even know how many years ago now, and I might not be giving it the fairest of shakes now. Was Starbound made by the Thor guy, the one from the piracy company? I know he used to work for Blizzard. I know who you're talking about. Pirate Gaming, I think. Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Oh, with the Gorgons and whatnot. So at least in Destiny 2, you could get a secret chest and whatnot. So there kind of was a secret, but maybe not so much in D1. I'm not super familiar with D1 because I really fell off that game after its disastrous launch and the failed like MMO stuff.
Very fun things to do while trying to shoot. Equally, because the game borrows randomly generated environments from elsewhere, with the areas and dungeons appearing in a random order, Remnant's locales don't feel as if they fit together cohesively as part of a single journey to mastery like they do in other Souls-likes, leading to them all just being kind of generic and forgettable with no distinct identity or sense of progression. Remnant's visuals, setting, and ideas are all great, but its failure to be a good Souls-like on a fundamental level means that I can't help but wish that it wasn't inspired by Dark Souls at all, which is, let's be honest, never a position you want a clone to be in. This brings me on to my final key point about clones, and that's that the best ones don't just attempt to distinguish themselves from their inspiration, but to supersede it, forming part of a genre-wide back and forth that leads to constant advancement and change as various clones all try to one-up each other. This is how FPS games freed themselves from comparisons to Doom. Each of Doom's clones try to improve upon it in different ways, adding better gunplay, or exploration, or a story, and gradually these clones, such as Half-Life, became so good and so popular that they became the new standard, inspiring a new generation of clones, all connected by their shared design lineage, rather than them all being copies of the same thing. And many other clones have seen similar success. There are a whole host of indie games that exist pretty much just as versions of existing games, but designed for veterans who are already familiar with the gameplay. The likes of Demon Crawl and Let's Revolution are more advanced takes on Minesweeper for people who've gotten bored of the classic version. Ultra-hardcore extraction games are for people desensitized to mainstream battle royales and who are in need of a stronger hit of the same stuff, and intricate strategy and management games like Battle Brothers and City Skylines assume an existing familiarity with the titans of the genre they're based on and are thus free to really push the boat out in terms of difficulty and complexity that simply wouldn't be possible in a title targeting a mass audience of relative newbies. City Skylines in particular was literally greenlit after Paradox saw the oversimplified SimCity 2013 crash and burn because series veterans wanted something more complex than the originals, not less. Additionally, rather than making a direct improvement or follow-up to an existing game, some clones stand out by copying not a whole title or a collection of titles, but just one small part, expanding it into a sort of pruned cutting of the original game. Disco Elysium, for example, is very heavily inspired by Planescape Torment, but removes all of the superfluous combat and a lot of the Dungeons & Dragons baggage to focus purely on narrative RPG storytelling. Of course, some clones of this type are made with a little bit less love and a lot more spite. There's a whole subgenre of indie games out there made by fans of Sonic who've had enough with Sega and have tried to make the Sonic game they've always wanted for themselves, one with no gimmicks and none of Sonic's stupid friends.
Which is ironic because arguably the best Sonic game that they've put out in years wasn't really by Sega in Sonic Mania. Although they came out like what? Is it a sequel, a DLC of Sonic Mania? I don't really know what it was. But yeah, I enjoyed Sonic Mania for the little bit that I played of it. Definitely gave me that hit of nostalgia and whatnot that I would have gotten from playing like Sonic and Knuckles 3D. Not 3D, but Sonic and Knuckles 3. Sonic and Knuckles, the same game, sort of.
Spark the Electric Jester 3 is one of the better known ones, taking the Sonic and Shadow sections of Sonic Adventure 2, which were like a quarter of that game, and blowing them up to be the whole experience. Now, with the time and space they need to breathe, these gameplay concepts can finally be put to good use, unburdened by the Knuckles treasure hunt bits interrupting my fun. Not all clones manage to justify their existence by improving upon or altering their inspirations though. There are a great many which take bold swings and end up totally failing to succeed what came before them. A lot of the
Oh man, like what was it called? The one where like the one Mega Man developer dude went and made his own type of Mega Man clone knockoff, but it was just terrible. I was extremely excited for it way back in the day. I was like, oh man, one of the OGs who created Mega Man is like coming back into the scene to make a kind of like spiritual successor that can't obviously be called Mega Man because he's not Capcom. But yeah, that game was really bad. I think I only played it for like 20 minutes. Anyway, Mighty Number 9. That's it exactly. You guys are the same. And I couldn't even really tell you why. Like I just played it for a brief amount of time and I was like, this ain't it. And I just never felt the desire to play it again. You forgot they put Yu Hayabusa in DOA. They put him into everything. My man's was in Warriors Orochi. You were a backer, sadly. Yeah. My condolences.
The would-be contenders to the Smash Bros. Crown ultimately failed to make a dent in its reputation because while they were serviceable fighting games in their own right, they lacked the sheer variety and depth offered by the original that makes it such a great competitive game, even if Nintendo wish it wasn't. Equally, Back 4 Blood.
Yeah, seeing a game like the Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl, I think the title is, just and seeing how much it lacks compared to Smash Bros. Just kind of really opens my eyes at how much freaking polish went into that game, or those games, I should say. Like, just the sound design alone just really puts Smash Bros. In a completely different category of gaming. Then you've got a lot of smaller things like the transition between the animations for certain attacks, the hit stun that enemies take, and whatnot. It's just kind of mind-boggling how much better Smash Bros. Is than the Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl in terms of like the finer details. And I'm not trying to like poop on Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl. Like, it's a very small like indie dev team. I totally respect their work on it and everything. It's just they didn't have the resources to make the thing that truly does compete with Smash Bros. For, whatever reason. But yeah, anyway.
Blood tried to add an extra layer of complexity and replayability to Left 4 Dead by adding a bunch of progression systems and variant enemies to what was otherwise the same concept. But in doing so, it ended up polluting the purity that makes Left 4 Dead work. Suddenly, it was impossible to tell at a glance how a particular enemy was going to attack you, and gameplay became much more about optimizing your deck of buff cards outside the game than clever teamplay and efficient shooting, spoiling what
Was that because you could buy them from the shop? Because it was always weird to me that they added in those cards and whatnot, but I didn't keep enough track of this game to really know what that was all about. Back 4 Blood sucked, and that's really unfortunate because I really really enjoyed Left 4 Dead. Like, that was one of the best co-op games that I'd played way back in the day. Boring, short, repetitive. But to be fair, even Left 4 Dead was kind of like that. I think maybe the difference is that like Left 4 Dead was novel when it came out. Yeah, because once you like go through most of the maps like 2 or 3 times, it just kind of like lost a lot of its novelty. Left 4 Dead was awesome. B4B was trash. No Valve. All right, thanks.
What was once a very focused experience. Unfortunately, Lords of the Fallen, one of our Souls-likes, falls into this same trap. It introduces a load of new gimmicks to spice up the Dark Souls formula, but it quickly becomes apparent that this stuff was absent in FromSoft's games for a reason. Making your own bonfires sounds cool, but because you can't see what's coming, you either make too many and the game's too easy, or too few and it's too hard. The same goes.
Yeah, and that's like one of those things where I feel like this isn't really that big of a problem. If they had just made that item a non-consumable item, like, most people wouldn't even really care about this. And that's kind of like one of the things that absolutely kills me about this game. Like, if the devs just fixed the systems of the game, like, the core gameplay is actually really respectable. And it's like all the other stuff surrounding it, which I feel is like really holding it back.
Goes for the
You finished up Lords of the Fallen 2014. Not terrible, but frustrating since you can feel the potential for a good game there. That's kind of how I feel about this one, although I think it's more on the side of good than, not terrible.
the game's Umbral Mirror World. It's visually cool and leads to some interesting puzzles, but it necessitates a load of really tiresome wandering around in both worlds, and the infinitely respawning baddies in the Umbral world mess with the delicate pacing of the areas. Lords of the Fallen also tries to up the ante on Dark Souls by having more traps, but how do I put this? When every box, corner, and item has a dude behind it waiting to spring out at you, in a sense, none of them do. Really, when it
That's kind of fair, I think. After a while, you definitely get conditioned to always want to look around the corners, which they may have done that a bit too much in that game. That might be a pretty fair criticism that I hadn't considered. They obviously do that a lot in the FromSoft games, but they also ease up quite a bit at times and allow players' guards to drop to an extent, which is kind of funny because they still manage to jump scare. Although I might be coming from a biased perspective because all I'm doing right now is like playing through Bloodborne in my mind, and I'm just thinking of the dudes in Central Yarnum popping out, and then the Scourge Beast in the darkness when you're going to Old Yarnum, and then the Scourge Beast which jumps out of the door that explodes and scares people. But I don't think the other Dark Souls were quite as jump scary as Bloodborne. But I mean, that probably speaks more to his point that like not literally around every corner is there going to be an enemy. And so, yeah, there's I don't want to say you can relax in Dark Souls, but you can become complacent a lot more easily in that than Lords of the Fallen. The stacking XP and loot multiplier for kills that resets at a save point is a great idea. So I feel like, yeah, this kind of goes to the systemic stuff. You might be talking about 2014, and I don't know how that works. But I do think the experience system in the 2023 version could have been tweaked. None of Lords of the Fallen's areas felt real at all. All areas just felt like a bunch of crap spread around. So I kind of disagree. I do feel like certain areas definitely felt a bit more fantastic, but I feel like the Leprosarium, like at the top of the map, that was kind of realistic to me because if you think of it as a kind of fortress or stronghold, it's kind of designed to keep people out of it, and we kind of breach it using super spectral magic, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, and to a certain extent, I kind of feel like that about the Dark Souls games as well. Like, they don't really feel realistic, but to be fair, Dark Souls itself doesn't like really set it up to be a kind of super realistic world either. So it just kind of all feels like a dream space, a liminal space or something like that. That's not in the new one. So there is a stacking multiplier to an extent, but it doesn't sound as robust as you're making it sound. 2014, just the movement felt a little too slidey. Made the tactical movement feel relevant. Okay. Yeah, I haven't played that one. Alright, going back to the video.
it comes right down to it, clones that stand out are the ones that eventually stop being clones at all, and the ones that fail to stick in your memory and distinguish themselves exist as static cultural objects, rather than as part of an ever-evolving dialogue. This is why I absolutely love Lies of P, in spite of its lack of enemy variety, linearity, and general lack of original ideas. Whoa, is that a poison swamp? It doesn't just feel like a game made by people who played Bloodborne and thought, yeah, I like that and I want more, so I'll do it again. It feels like a game made by people who played Bloodborne and thought, yeah, that was good, but we can do better. So much of Lies of P is a direct reaction to other Souls-likes, changing and improving upon their systems in a way that aren't just for the better, but also serve to give the game its own unique feel. Bloodborne's combat is pretty simplistic and spammy, don't correct me in the comments, so Lies of P adds a bunch of cool new moves you can do to bring fights to a satisfying conclusion, like each weapon's unique charge moves. The game also goes out of its way to fix a lot of long-standing quality of life issues, like removing the necessity of farming healing items, telling you where NPC quests are on the map, and giving you a customizable rechargeable weapon buff, so no more having to save them forever and never ending up using them. The game even lets you customize your gear, with the weapon's handle determining its scaling, moveset, and one of its abilities, and the blade determining its damage, elemental type, and the other special move. It's a super cool system with loads of depth, and I absolutely love it, to the point that my only real wish for it is for FromSoft to steal it and put it in one of their games. It's that good. And that's...
It's kind of funny, but it's a little bit messed up, because I've said like similar things about Lords of the Fallen. We're like, oh, this is the cool system, I hope another company steals it and makes it better, rather than just being like, oh, I can't wait to see what this company that made this system does next. It's kind of funny just how much FromSoft still kind of stands above the rest. But nonetheless, I am really glad that there seem to be more competitors starting to enter the market that can actually be taken seriously. That's just kind of a big win, I think, for gamers right now.
Also, kind of the point of clones, right? Almost every good video game, in fact, probably almost every game period, began life as a clone. Inspiration doesn't just appear from thin air, it comes from how we experience existing media, how we react to it, respond to it, and want to improve upon it. Creating an ever-shifting cultural landscape of clones that become fixtures in of themselves, which in turn spawn more clones that will in time replace them. And rather than being a generic platitude to excuse lazy copying, this fundamental fact of all art is a reminder that clones need to be done well and have their own voice, otherwise they're not fulfilling their purpose. This is why I've tried to be fair to all the Souls-likes that I wasn't as much of a fan of, because while I don't think most of them are particularly great, the bold choices and changes they make can serve as lessons to games that follow in their footsteps, and might even serve as inspirations to future titles that refine their raw potential, and in that way, they are just as valuable a clone as Lies of P is. This is also why many big budget games' insistence on endlessly dragging in a million games and mechanics into a single amorphous clone blob frustrate me so much. The endless open world kitchen sinks like Starfield, Hogwarts Legacy, and Ubisoft's entire catalogue are clones of everything, and so have nothing.
It's always Ubisoft that gets pooped on the most. It's just really funny to me. Yeah, so, okay, I'll let him continue. I was going to say something, but...
to say and present nothing to react to. In many ways, these utterly unambitious and derivative clones, whose sole aim is to do nothing new and challenge or comment on as little as possible, are worse than merely being bad games, as they actively serve to bog down the advancement and progression of their genre and give a bad name to clones that don't. Without clones that tried to build on what came before them in small but significant ways, evolving the medium and learning lessons with every step, we'd still think Doom was the best Wolfenstein clone ever, and FromSoft would still be making Kingsfield games. If we deify one particular game or way of making games too much, and fail to acknowledge challengers to the throne, then genres we love can risk stagnating and wallowing in their own history, instead of dynamically evolving over time.
Yeah, I feel like the way that he phrased this argument just kind of feels off to me, and that he's like placing too much emphasis on games being clones rather than just like their own individual things, which I mean, I definitely understand that coming from the framework of this video, but I don't know, it just feels a little bit unfair, I think, in some ways.
Because, let's be honest, all the games we think are unimpeachable tentpoles made to be imitated are definitely all clones themselves. Similarly, Call of Duty wouldn't exist without Medal of Honor, World of Warcraft wouldn't exist without EverQuest, and Slay the Spire wouldn't exist without DreamQuest. None of these games are unique, and none of them will stick around forever. And that's okay. Hell, some of them have already been replaced by clones. And as a final note, this philosophy is especially true for making things as well as consuming media. The only way to get started as an artist creating anything is to first create a clone and then come up with its individual identity later by reacting to and building off from your inspiration. Disney's classics are all just adapted folk stories, Shakespeare himself said imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and even this YouTube channel started life as me doing a really terrible Game Maker's Toolkit / sequelitis impression. Sure, it didn't start sucking slightly less until I came up with a perspective and voice that was a bit more unique, but that couldn't have happened without first finding my footing as a copycat. So,
Morlor brings up a good point. They say they feel like without him defining what a clone is clearly, the entire video becomes incomprehensible for the most part. Like, it's not really saying anything because you don't know what it's talking about. Yeah. So I think this is kind of ironic because he made the point earlier was like with an enemy behind every corner, there's essentially like no surprises around any corner. So if every game is a clone, then it just kind of makes some of this argument a little bit incomprehensible. And of course, like this is like saying like this is being a little bit less charitable towards the creator here right now, and that's definitely not what they're trying to say. So I feel like they're just tunnel visioned a little bit too much in this section right here, but everything else I think has been pretty good so far. Iterative development is good.
Yes,
yeah.
Clones are everywhere. Yes, there are more of them every day. And yes, most of them sort of suck. But without clones, video games wouldn't be the vibrant, varied medium they are today, and they may very well not exist at all. The important thing to remember is that the only way to stop lazy, creatively bankrupt clones from smothering everything else is for us to spot the few that have something interesting to say, genuine passion behind them, or just some cool ideas worth stealing, and give them the attention and publicity they deserve so that they too can one day inspire some new clones.
Yeah, and I feel like this is getting really repetitive now, but damn, what was I gonna say before I said that kind of mean thing? Oh, right. With not defining clones and giving more space to talk about like knockoffs, I think this argument here really kind of sweeps actual game clones and real knockoffs under the rug because they're all being put under the same umbrella when they definitely shouldn't be. So to call a game like Hollow Knight a Metroidvania clone, I think just really overlooks how much of Hollow Knight is Hollow Knight, because, well, it might have some derivative gameplay features. It certainly has its own characterization in terms of its art style, its storytelling, and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, I kind of feel like even I'm beating a dead horse by talking about that right now. Hey, Spaghetti, nice to see you again.
Word to the wise, don't try and copy this channel because then people will find out that almost anyone could do it better than me, and I can't do a real job. Please don't take this away from me. I'm begging you, please. I need money to buy crisps. Hello and welcome to this, a special holiday after the video special. Ho ho ho, etc. Don't worry, I'm hard at work on the end of year video. I just thought that I'd bash this one out in the meantime while I'm still compiling my final list and narrowing it down from the 80 odd it was at the start. Oof. Anyway, this is the part of every video where I shout out some cool people that you need to be paying attention to and talk about why they're so great. And this time, I'd like to point you in the direction of Marika, a video essayist with the self-styled tagline of "Style is Substance." And if that doesn't tell you all about the kind of game she covers, then nothing else will. Marika specializes in weird, surrealist, and most importantly, gorgeous games that you've probably never heard of, and explains why that in spite of the fact that almost nothing she talks about has ever come close to commercial success, these games and their offbeat messages are still worth attention and appreciation, in many parts because of their incompatibility with mainstream video game design. Marika is great.
No, I want to know what game this is a clone of.
Please check her out. And I can't mention the benefits of incompatibility with the mainstream without mentioning my wonderful patrons. Do you enjoy me having the freedom to relentlessly slag off big budget video games that would much rather I say nice things about them in exchange for money? Well, thanks to the support of my wonderful patrons, I don't have to take it. Independent games criticism is more important than ever before now that we're in the age of Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards, and so it's been a privilege to be able to do it for all you people for as long as I have. And apologies, but I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. And if you're interested in supporting me and joining my beautiful, intelligent, and thoroughly over-flattered patrons, you'll even get some cool bonus content in return, like early access to videos, extra bits of game design goodness, behind-the-scenes stuff, and even your name in the credits, with my very special $10 a month patrons getting a voiced shout-out as a very special reward. And those people are... Ali Wright, Andrew Lebrano, Asaran, Auno94, Brennan Spalding, Brian Notariani, Buy More Skyrim for Todd, Constantine Amend, Cool Jam, Cosmix360, Daniel Menchez, Das Kangaroo, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Digletier, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkull, IFR93, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jinkaloid, Jordan Gear, Kevin Help Us, Luke Kokoran, Mace154, Marika Vladilina Altair, Mark Vallant, Meme Dragon, Mika Oi, Nate Graff, NWDD, Oliver Marhofer, Patrick Romberg, Peter Tomasic, RedditX, Regal Regex.
I've just been like waiting for a very questionable name to scroll on by at some point. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about this. Like he's perfectly fine to do it in his own videos. I'm just thinking like from my perspective is like content creation. I've thought about doing stuff like this, like the audible shoutouts. I don't know. I just like to have my runtimes be as short as I can possibly get away with, just because I kind of value a lot of people's times. Which is ironic because on the streams like half the time it seems like I'm padding for time. Like, oh no, I paused the video again just to go off on another tangent. But I mean that's completely different. So yeah, I don't know. It always feels really awkward for me trying to balance the whole communal aspect of content creation because I feel like I do want to give back to the community who gives to me, but I just don't really feel like I have a good way of doing that, or I don't know like what a good way of doing that would be. So stuff like this, it makes sense to me, but it's also just something that I don't like because I like things to be as concise as possible, I guess. I don't know. So how do you guys feel about this in the chat and whatnot? Because I feel like I don't do enough, but I also feel like I don't know what to do better. Send everyone a nice handwritten letter. That might not be the worst idea that I've heard. Until we start like factoring, shipping, and all that. Maybe an end card. Yeah, I use the end card for the most part, but good way to give back to use money. You'll take all of it, please. All right. Let me know your channel information. If it's at the end of a video, I don't care regardless. You feel like the live streams are a good way to interact with the community? You'd hate a name list like that? Okay. Yeah, and if it is at the end of the video, everybody could always just like move on to the next one and whatnot. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, like when I'm doing these streams, I want to give each content creator the fullest amount of attention that they deserve. So I will like sit through their ads and their shout outs and whatnot, just because it's the courteous thing to do. Here's your bank info and address. Yeah, just give me your credit card information, the 3 digits on the back, and you'll get your money in your bank account in 5 to 10 business days. All right, Spaghetti, thank you. I appreciate that.
Revelation, Ray's Dad, Silver Fulfy, Steamrollerman, Steve Riley, Tom Marsden, Ty Guren, Tyler Duncan, Uprising, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Brantmeyer, and Chow. Whew, okay, that is all from me. I hope you have a lovely holiday season, because some of us have got to get back to work and finish up this damn end of year video. Alright, okay. Bye!
Alright, so... Oh yeah, I should turn autoplay off. Wait, where the hell is it even in that button? But words... Anyway.
Okay.
Wait, the auto... Oh, playlists just automatically go, don't they? Anyway, not too important. So I'm going to go ahead and link this into the chat for you guys if you want to go ahead and give Adam Millard a like and or a sub. So even though I thought it was a little bit repetitive at the end, I did enjoy that video. I'm kind of curious what all else they have. The anti-game. I wonder what an anti-game is. Terra Nil is a reverse city builder. It isn't. RPGs were never about role-playing. 2023 games you should have played. Starfield versus reality. All right, so this looks like some pretty interesting stuff. I'll go ahead and give them a sub. Figuring out fishing. Why the hell are there so many fishing minigames? Yeah. The nostalgia chap. Okay, yeah, this looks like a fun channel to check out more of sometime. All right, so I've gone ahead and linked this video into chat if you want to give them a like and or a sub. Adam Millard, the architect of games. The reason why I repeated that was so that way it might stick in my head a bit better. I don't want it full screen. I want to get out of theater mode. Press T. There we go. All right. Next video we will watch is How Game Reviews Affect Your Perception by Daryl Talks Games. So I saw this a couple weeks ago, I think on my page, like my home screen and whatnot, and I think I added this into the list manually just because this topic was like really interesting to me, especially because I have reviewed a couple games. So like I'm curious like what effect, if any, that I've had on other people. Dark Souls 2 sucks. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive on in to this video. Attorney General. Oh yeah. AG.
Hey there. Before we get started, quick reminder that part 2 of the backlog video is coming next month. I hope you're ready. Let me knock out this word from our sponsor real quick, then we'll get the show started. Thanks to Opera GX for sponsoring this video, and thanks for being the browser that I genuinely use every day. If you haven't heard, Opera GX is quite simply the browser for gamers, and it is absolutely free. I'm going to tell you about a few of the features that it comes with, but just know that it's maybe this much of what you can actually do with it. For starters, you have access to something called GX Mods, which basically takes a bland everyday browsing experience and breathes a little life into it. You like Nier Automata? How about some new colors and a new background? Here's what moving over buttons and opening new tabs sounds like.
Hey Stella,
Even your
welcome to the
typing
stream.
sounds
Yes,
change.
apparently Opera still
What about
exists.
that Hollow Knight mod? That might be the one. Go ahead and download Opera. Play
You don't
around. There's a
trust
ton
any
to choose
product
from.
marketed
My favorite
as for
feature by
gamers.
far is the GX Corner, which I use quite a bit actually. It
So I feel like
aggregates all
he might
future
just be
game
going
releases
off of his
here,
own script
and they've
rather
even
than
added
the
a
Opera
bell
one,
to
but
each
who
one
knows?
so that if you want to click and be notified on release day, you can. It also compiles game sales here, gaming news here, and it even compiles game trailers here in case there isn't already enough releasing this month. You really don't want to miss this browser. Use my link below to download. And I get
Honestly, those features do seem kind of nice. I don't know, I'm just kind of a boomer when it comes to computers and whatnot. So, oh man, just to give a little bit of a reference of like how much of a boomer I am, like the way that I have my desktop set up, I can't really show you guys, but I've gone out of my way for like years and whatnot now to, I can do it like this. I could just, anyway, hold on, let me pull this up. I've gone out of my way for years now to make a kind of a quick release, not quick release, like a quick launch bar on my taskbar, just because it was a feature that I loved from like Windows XP or like Windows 95, and I got super upset that they got rid of it in not Windows 10, Windows 8. Yeah, because they skipped 9 to go to 10 or something like that. So I like made my own, and so yeah, my computer's essentially just like old school style because I'm a boomer.
it. Swapping browsers is a real pain in the neck because of passwords and favorites and such, which is why Opera GX makes this super easy. Click the gear, find synchronization, click import bookmarks and settings, import, and you're done. So use my link below and go download Opera GX for free today. Thanks again to Opera for the sponsor. Now let's start the show. It's a brisk fall morning in the year 1968. Two researchers have just given a test to all of the students of an elementary school. The teachers are told that this test would determine who among the student body would be sure to bloom. Which of these promising young minds had the most likely chance of becoming a true scholar? Here's the catch. The test didn't mean a damn thing. It didn't evaluate their academic potential. It was actually just a copy of the Declaration of Independence with every instance of the word men replaced with bad bitches. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
For a second, I was like, wait, is this real? And then, yeah, that got me for a moment.
That all bad bitches are created equal. I made that part up. But the fact remains that the test meant nothing. The point was not to research the students, it was to research the teachers. You see, each instructor was given a small list of kids in their class that were identified by the exam as bloomers, when unbeknownst to the teachers, these kids were just picked at random. The test had nothing to do with it. And do you know what happened? At the end of the school year, the researchers came back to check up on these secretly randomly selected gifted kids. They gave them an IQ test and, sure enough, they showed significantly greater gains than their fellow non-bloomer students. And
Yeah, that's pretty wild. And part of it would be that I believe if the teachers knew that certain children had the aptitude to be better than their peers, then if those students had questions or whatnot, even if they didn't necessarily have questions, I imagine that the teachers would have wanted to pay more attention to them so that way they could grow the most. Or, you know, they're just kind of like singled out to bloom. So, yeah. As they say, like, Actually, I don't remember the saying, so never mind. RGB lights and Funko Pops, right? No, I hate all of that, unironically.
Do you want to know what's even stranger? This study has been replicated more than a few times with similar results, which begs the question, what the hell does this have to do with game reviews? Well, my friend, you'd be surprised, because video games are like children. This is a weird start. Neither can really be fully defined by a single test or evaluation. You can give a child an exam, and you can review a game, but the results of neither of these gives you an all-encompassing truth about the depth of who that child is or will become, much less what that game is, can be, or what it will be to you when you play it. Maybe the child had a cold when that exam was administered. Maybe the reviewer of that game is already a massive fan of the series. Maybe that's your favorite series. What do you mean it's only a 7? Maybe that's your favorite child. What do you mean they aren't gifted? The point is, reviews, much like exams, only give us a snapshot of a game that often tell us less about the game itself and more about how people are going to treat that game moving forward. Not to say that all reviews are bullshit or that they don't help us make decisions about game purchases, they certainly do, but they do a lot more than that, whether we consciously realize it or not. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because as you're probably thinking after hearing that fake exam study, there is far more to the story here. In preparation for this video, I have pored over more studies about reviews than I ever care to do again. I have polled you about how often you rely on reviews, and I have used reviews far more often than I like to admit for the past year as I've been navigating this whole gaming backlog project that all comes to blows next month. It has not all gone to shit. Relax. And I have compiled all of this here to present to you in an interesting manner today. So without further ado, let's talk about reviews. I should not be doing this professionally.
Rip. So yeah, I'm curious to see what he's going to say about it. I do think that when one is reviewing a game, there's a certain amount of there's going to be like certain pitfalls and like hyper focusing on things that probably might not be all that important, which is one thing that I worry about when I do present my reviews at times. And I think one issue is that the way a review can be presented to somebody is so varied that I think it's a little bit challenging to just talk about it as a full subject. So I'm curious as to whether or not he's going to focus on certain aspects of the reviews. On like, I'm trying to think of like a concrete example. So like, what's a weird thing that reviewers talk about, which like most gamers wouldn't. So okay, here's like a weird one that I kind of talk about a bit on some of my reviews is that like I think FromSoft is kind of trash at tutorializing their games at times to making players be successful in like navigating some of the systems that they've got going on. So one example of that would be in Bloodborne, you've got the rally mechanic. That's just barely explained at all. That you can kind of get your HP back. And it's another thing to explain it, and then it's another thing to experience it. And Bloodborne does not hold the player's hand pretty much at all after you wake up in the sick room, which is perfectly fine and definitely like part of its charm. Like that's the vibe that they're going for, and it works. But that doesn't necessarily set players up for success. And I know a lot of people struggle getting into some of the FromSoft games because of those difficulties. And so for a reviewer to like hyper focus on something like tutorialization might not really be relevant to most players. And I think that's like one of the pitfalls that I was alluding to earlier. Captini hates that you can't find good mouses with balls these days. You love the feel and resistance of that well-dirtied ball rolling on the desk until you got like a hair stuck in it, and then it just became inoperable. Making up just lies. You remember some article saying you can cut bushes in Hunt Showdown if you have a machete? That is not true at all. So sometimes stuff like that can happen if reviewers are given like a certain developer build of the game to work with, and maybe it just became like too much of a headache to fully implement that feature later on down the line, because that kind of stuff does happen. But of course there can be lies, and I think I'm glad you kind of like brought that up, because that reminded me that I do think nowadays there is the kind of really weird danger where some reviewers are in bed with the games that they're presented. So a lot of reviews or review outlets, I suppose I should say, are much less inclined to be, let's say, fair and balanced, or as fair and balanced as they could be, because they may not want to harm that relationship with the publisher and whatnot. And yeah, it's just a real mess. I'm sure that'll probably come up at some point throughout this video, though.
If you're a gamer that pays attention to reviews, and survey says you probably are, one of the first things that comes to mind is likely this whole song and dance. There is a game that comes out, it is reviewed, people are upset, and that's the whole song and dance. It's a very short routine. But I've kind of found over the years that it takes two forms. One is the inevitable questioning of journalistic integrity from large review outlets, accusations of reviewers being paid off, or the eventual video like this popping up later on down the line. The other form is just buzz from your fellow internet schmuck, the Twitter timeline being aglow with every hot take you can imagine, the Steam reviews filled with every variety of impressively well articulated to impressively comedic descriptions of games, but nonetheless, they appear in front of our faces and we have to make sense of them. And one 2019 study categorized these two forms of reviews and tried to understand the discrepancies between the video game press, what they label the experts, and casual gamers, or quote-unquote amateurs. And I think this is an important discrepancy to understand because it's in these differences that I think we find some truth about what reviews actually capture about games and how they affect people. By aggregating over 1 million reviews from Metacritic, the researchers...
So I think one of my biggest issues with the reviews and the review scores that are given out now is that they're kind of what I would compare to like classroom grades, essentially, where you've got A, B, C, D, F. So essentially like 5 points to like really review something on. But the difference between an F that's worth 0 and an F that's worth 59 points is 59 freaking points. So I think most review outlets that operate on the 10 scale don't even consider giving something a 5 or below unless it's like awfully bad or they actually have like a pretty decent reviewer on their hands. So you really kind of just left with 6s and above. And depending on how you feel about a 6, that doesn't mean like it's a bad game, but if a 6 is to a D, that's not a good game either. So where does that really leave you room to work with? 7, 8, and 9, and 10. So of course, I guess I should have like included 10, but I didn't originally. So ignore like my letter analogy because it doesn't work actually. So, but anyway, if you only have a 7 to be like a sub optimal game, like a kind of average game, a game that's not exactly bad, but it's not like going to wow anybody, then what does that make? An 8 and then a 9 and then a 10? I think they just like are kind of really limiting themselves in a general sense. And that's kind of my impression of a lot of these 10-point game review scales. And thinking about this now, I might change the way that I present my scale of games in the future. So rather than focusing on essentially 1 through 9, I might just do like the whole, what I would call like the standard deviation type thing. So to give a bit of a reference point of that, the way that I rate games is based off of a kind of like bell curve scale, which isn't exactly like a real bell curve. Let me pull up my little image that I always use in my videos. Bell. So yeah, this is my little bell curve of what I would call an average, fun, and enjoyable game. So I think most games are actually going to be 5. So you could just kind of like ignore the percents here. And so I would rate a game that's a 7 as being like 2 standard deviations better than your average game. So I think, what's a good 7? So I would list the original Dark Souls as a 7. And the reason why I don't think it's like 3 standard deviations or more high, like better than the other games, is like Dark Souls 1 is janky as hell. There's a lot of unintuitive features to it. It's not player friendly by any means. You can't respec. A lot of the cooler items are only obtained late game, and it's just a real slog to have to go through certain sections of the game or like trophy hunt and whatnot. So that kind of like all these negative things can make Dark Souls 1 sound like not that great, but it's still way better than the vast majority of games. So that's kind of like one thing that I would want to impress. So maybe rather than focusing on like the 1 through 9, I should say, oh, I think this game is 2 standards of deviation better than other games. And so while I would give Dark Souls 1 a 7 out of 10, I would give like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro an 8 out of 10. And Elden Ring, I would put probably on a very first playthrough between an 8 and a 9, but not quite there. And a game that I would actually give like a 9 out of 10, which I could only barely possibly imagine being slightly better than it currently is, would be like Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. Because that's like almost like the pinnacle of polish as far as like games are concerned. And pretty much the only thing that I would want to change about Super Smash Bros. Is the what's called the net play and or being able to remap some keys, and like literally that's it. That is like the only way that I think I could possibly see that game being improved whatsoever. So that's like extremely close to perfect in my book. And so for me, I haven't really ever like said this out loud on stream. I don't think. I think the most quintessentially average game to me would be Dynasty Warriors, like the old ones. I maybe like the new ones are kind of garbage. I don't know, because Dynasty Warriors does not pretend to be anything other than Dynasty Warriors. I enjoy Dynasty Warriors, but it's kind of like more of a guilty pleasure. It's not something like, oh man, you guys need to play Dynasty Warriors. No, I'm a little bit embarrassed for liking those games, but I mean, they're fun. I can turn my brain off and just kind of juggle enemies. That's not what I like about the series. I like the older versions where it's like a little bit more interplay. But anyway, that's just to give like a little bit of scale. And so games for me below Dynasty Warriors are ones which take advantage of the players and are like mobile games. So stuff like Diablo Immortal. Gotcha games like Genshin Impact, I have absolutely zero interest in, but I would be transparent about that. And so even though it might have like good actual game systems and whatnot, I think like fundamentally the systems just like completely turn me off from that kind of game. So anyway, that's not too important. So yeah, just getting triggered about reviews and whatnot. Let me pull the video back up and see what you guys have been saying in chat. You get not trusting 10 out of 10 reviews. Oh yeah, thank you, Stella, because that reminded me. So when Starfield came out, somebody had posted in my Discord like the review, or maybe I did. Yeah, no, I think I posted it in the Discord from Reddit that like they took the combined like game aggregate reviews for Starfield, and one of the reviews that I saw gave Starfield a 10 out of 10, which it's fine. But the issue that I personally had with calling Starfield a 10 out of 10 based on that review is that they gave like a list of pros and cons, and the cons list wasn't empty. They had like 4 or 5 cons on a game that they gave a 10 out of 10. I'm like, what the hell? How does a 10 out of 10 have like this many cons? Like, and like these weren't cons like, oh, this game is so good, you're gonna waste your life on it. Like that wasn't the con. Like these are like actual like legitimate bad things of the game. Starfield is easily a 4 on a 1 to 10 rating. You have to take into account if the game is really for the reviewer's taste ultimately, because that will color their opinion. Exactly. And so I feel like once you have a better understanding of like where the review is coming from, that you can kind of digest what that review actually means to you. And I feel like outlets like IGN are just kind of garbage because there's no consistency to the reviews that are given out. Way back in the day in like Nintendo Power and Game Informer, they had this brilliant system of having new games come out but be reviewed by multiple people. So actually, let's go ahead and pull something up on screen, because it's just kind of sad to me that such a great system got lost to time essentially. Game Informer reviews. Oh no, that's gonna be old stuff. 1998. Let's go to images. Final Fantasy VII. So I'm trying to like get one. Okay, here we go. So Blitz. Oh, let's open this in a new tab so we can actually see it. Oh god, I read it. Like changed everything. So we had 3 people reviewing NFL Blitz. So John gave it a 9.25 out of 10 based off of these metrics, which I think is absolutely brilliant because you know what they're rating it on. Then they have the little blurb talking about like what the game appealed to, like how it appealed to them personally or how it did not. Paul gave it an 8.7 out of 5 or 8.75 out of 10. Reiner, the Raging Gamer, gave it a 9 out of 10. So one of the most brilliant aspects of this system is like, oh yeah, I remember Reiner, the Raging Gamer. He's like the little barbarian guy. He likes these types of action games. He and I kind of have similar tastes. He gave this game a 9. Oh, maybe it's worth checking out, you know? Whereas like maybe I didn't always agree with John, but oh man, even John think this is a good game and we don't really see eye to eye, and maybe there's something to look into it. So they gave like the bottom line a 9 out of 10 because they just kind of average all of these scores, which I think was a good system. So if you're a big company like IGN, to me it makes a lot of sense to have something like this, to have that kind of consistency, and it just really saddens me that it is gone the wayside. A lot of nostalgia seeing those old Game Informer editions. I can resist pooping on DS2 because it is 2. A good example is how polarized the Alan Wake 2 reviews are. There are definitely flaws, but a lot of the really bad reviews are people who just weren't the target audience for it, and it shows. Yeah, there's no world where Bethesda should get a 10 out of 10 based on the fact the engines are janky alone. New Vegas is floated entirely by its writing and everybody knows it. You also forgot to say it floated entirely by its mod community, but yeah. Okay. Now that I'm done with my tangent, let's go ahead back into the video.
Built a large-scale dataset of reviews that were from both experts and amateurs. Some of the key findings were that amateurs tend to give much more polarized ratings of games. Amateurs tend to continually rate games surprisingly long after game release, and are positively biased towards older games. Can't imagine why, but the key takeaways for me came in the post-research discussion where the researchers state that experts employ—
Wait, what? Did he say where this came from? I'm gonna amateur reviews of video games on Metacritic. Hold on, I'm actually going to read this on my off time because I'm really curious about that whole nostalgia line. So let me pull up a notepad and type this in. Amateur reviews of video games on Metacritic. Santiago Santos, or no, just Tiago. It's not cut off. It's just like the angle. Anyway, and Florian Limerick. That'll be good enough for me once I fix that name. Okay. So obviously, with me literally playing Alundra on stream for the past couple weeks, I might be a little bit biased towards the older games, but I am really legitimately curious as to whether or not those older games are better in many ways. And that's something I want to explore more of. What am I doing? Okay.
Large-scale dataset of reviews that were from both experts and amateurs.
Oops.
Some of the key findings were that amateurs tend to give much more polarized ratings of games. Amateurs tend to continually rate games surprisingly long after game release, and are positively biased towards older games. Can't imagine why, but the key takeaways for me came in the post-research discussion where the researchers state that experts employ a clinical, detached writing style which reflects their experience and is reflected in their unimodal rating distribution. Amateurs, on the other hand, use emotionally charged language and award rather extreme ratings. They appear dedicated to either glorify games or express their grievances with them, and at times to signal their disagreement with experts.
And that's very true for like a lot of people, and that's completely understandable because the actual audience review scores for games on like Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes can differ drastically from the reviewer scores. But He hasn't gone into this yet. He might, so I might end up stepping on his toes here. But I think one of the reasons for that is when I think about film criticism and I think of like film reviewers like Siskel and Ebert or whatever floats your boat. I think they also judge films based off of different criteria. So they look at things like how well it was edited, the actual direction of the film, the quality of the acting, more so than the general experience. So I think it's no secret that some of the most beloved movies by audiences were hated by critics. So Hook with Robin Williams, one of my absolute favorite children movies of all time. That was a critic bomb. I think Home Alone also had pretty poor critic reviews, but it's like one of the most beloved Christmas movies of all time. You could say the exact same thing about A Christmas Story. Like all of these like really popular, fun, good movies just are not critically appealing for whatever reason. So I'm curious how much of that kind of plays, like how much that kind of plays into video game reviews, because I think in general that aspect of reviewing games is less focused on compared to like film review. Like I think it's very uncommon for game reviewers to say, "Oh, I think the direction of this game was really good," and yeah, I've got a lot to say about that. So man, there's so many videos I like want to make and things I want to talk about, but like the amount of effort that I would need to do them is just kind of like daunting. It's not daunting, so like I want to do them justice, but to do them justice requires a lot of effort, which is a lot of effort, and time is the limiting factor. Time, motivation, and all that other stuff. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to mention before like hopping back into the video is now that I'd like gone through Alundra and somebody had asked me like what I would rate it yesterday, but I was like, I don't really know how I feel yet until like I beat it and like can really think about it. I think I would give Alundra a like maybe a 6 out of 10, which sounds really harsh, but I think if you keep in mind my rating system, that I think it would be like one standard deviation above like most other games. I could potentially say it's like 2, but I mean, at this point in 2023, like Alundra is just like a fun game. It's like nothing like super revolutionary. Maybe the story would be really good for some people who aren't like too familiar with that type of content. But I mean, a lot more games have presented those themes now than they really had back in 1997, 1998. So anyway, I think Alundra is a good game. It does have some like a little bit of jank, but yeah, I don't know. Not like it's not going to blow people away who've never played it before now. So anyway, not too important. Captini thinks older games are better in many ways. If you're playing an older game, it's because you want to. And yeah, just like thinking like why am I going back and playing a game from PlayStation 1 when there's so many ones from 2023 that I haven't played yet? Are we asking learned scholars or zeitgeist reporters? I'm not sure yet. I think there's probably a little bit of an overlap in terms of like professional critics versus like the amateur audience style critics. The amount of time you may have to sink into a game is definitely going to be more of a problem if you don't enjoy it as opposed to spending a couple hours on a movie. That's true as well. People don't play games from 20 years ago by accident. That's a good point too. But my question is, why do games from 20 years ago still have as much relevance as they do to players? Which might be a bit of a like an oversimplification or like an oversight, because like by the same token, I suppose I could ask, why do people watch movies from 20 years ago rather than what came out last year? maybe that's a good question to ask myself. I'll need to ponder that.
Writers go on to say that both amateurs and experts are pretty damn good at predicting a game's actual long-term popularity, so clearly both crowds are playing the same game, but they also believe that gauging overall public opinion of a video game requires adequately discounting the emotion in the often extreme video game ratings and reviews by amateurs to distill actionable feedback for developers. In other words, both crowds tend to agree, but there is a portion of the amateur crowd that takes this really personally, and that's something that's rarely found in expert reviews. For some folks that do write amateur reviews, whether they be properly done here or hurriedly done here, I think we can all agree that sometimes there is a bit of actually at play. Especially if a respected reviewer didn't see things your way in regards to a game release you've been salivating over for months. And I think this is a big reason.
I just gotta say, I absolutely love this visual. This is great.
See things your way in regards to a game release you've been salivating over for months. And I think this is a big reason for the outliers, why there is so much more variance in amateur reviews. Since the expert reviews come out first, I think it often leaves the rest of us in a reactionary state. If you play a game after seeing a review, your experience with that title is predicated by that review. And so naturally, you're going to
Yeah, I 100% agree with this, and it's one of the things that annoys me the most about the current state of gaming, that so many outlets get hands-on access to these titles before other people, and I'll definitely be honest and say, like, some of that is definitely jealousy, and I would probably be hypocritical enough to do the exact same if given that opportunity, but I think even with me saying that, I could still lament on some level that that's just the way that the game is played, metaphorically speaking, of course, and that in an ideal world, I think it would be best if everybody were able to get their hands on a product at the same time, but that's just kind of not how it works, and there's no real changing it, so just kind of have to deal with it. Stella's excuse for playing old games is that the newest system you can play on is your friend's Xbox and you don't live with her anymore. Otherwise, you get a computer from 2015 with a video card from 2017. Yeah, and of course, like, there are going to be those limiting factors, but then why don't you play games that came out in 2017 instead of 2004? Oh, that hurts. They cost less to make? It allowed more dev emotion and freedom. Maybe, I think, Did you lose a comment in there somewhere? Because I'm not, like, following your train of thought, Chadwick. Oh, are you talking about movies or... anyway. You can run a lot of indie still. True story. Scaleasy's not a fan of the current trend of day one reviews are overly positive, next wave is overly negative as backlash, next wave is tempered and more accurate. Or maybe that was just Starfield, not sure. So, here is the thing. That's just a product, I think, of how much time is able to be devoted to each. How do I phrase that? Like, I think those types of waves of reviews are products of how much time the reviewer is able to devote to that game. There we go. And so, to give a little bit more context about that, if somebody only has like 6 hours to get, their first impressions of a game, it's probably going to be pretty positive for the most part, because most games aren't trash. It's like as soon as you pick them up, and because of that, it might take longer to run into the flaws. So if people only have like 6 to 20 hours to review a game, they're probably not going to run into too many of the issues that are going to make their review end up on the more negative side of things. However, the people that can spend anywhere from 20 to 100 hours are probably going to be able to see more of the negatives. And because the people who did the 6 to 20 hour reviews first popped off with their videos, they may feel it incumbent upon themselves to give a kind of, quote, balanced take by highlighting more of the negatives to the general audience at large, so that way they'll get kind of like both sides of the issue. So like you'll get the positive and the negative. So it is reactionary, as our friend was just saying here. But beyond that, the people who can really spend the most time with the game can give the most tempered takes, but that's going to take way longer. And for those types of quality reviews to get to be made, it's going to come at a time where the game is pretty much done making its major sales outside of like specific like actual like sale dates or like holidays and events, things like that. So I think that's just kind of a byproduct of the content creation machine. So, and I don't think it's like really, to some extent, I do think some reviews are definitely made in a reactionary manner. Some are just a byproduct of like the system, I think. Hopefully that makes sense. You mean games are cheaper to make in the 80s and 90s? It allowed for more developer and publisher risk and freedom. Games are so huge now, they take an act of Congress to change a texture. It's so big and dangerous, big titles must attempt to play things safe. Yeah, and that's very true as well, but I think that's just kind of like getting off like to a different tangent right now. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and as Captina says, don't new titles use more on marketing than on the game itself? It feels like it's similar to tech industry where instead of engineers, marketers become the leaders. And I think that is a big problem that is more of a recent phenomenon as far as like the actual marketing of games is concerned. Doesn't mean it didn't exist in the past, but I think it's a bigger problem now.
Either agree or disagree, typically a little more extremely in one direction or the other as you attempt to process what you played. What you have to be careful about is a self. One of the silliest things about video game reviews is that we try to assign a neat little number to them or a star rating that is supposed to sum up at a glance how good it is, just like we would do for the staples around the block. But unfortunately, all of the intricacies of Starfield cannot be summed up as easily as the poor customer service Cherry got a month ago. Now, of course, many game reviews do carefully describe these intricacies, but we all know damn well we've all been guilty of just checking these numbers and then going about our business. So many games these days are near living, breathing worlds that will be a different experience for everyone who plays them. And yet we continually try to crunch all of this down to a single quantifiable value because, admittedly, it's a good conversation starter, but it's also neat and gives our minds a quick, readily understandable metric that we can use to make a judgment call. Should I buy this? Should I put a ton of hours into it? Is it worth replaying or 100%ing? A review score gives us a reference point to begin making evaluations with, just like the fake exam results did for the teachers in the Bloomer study. Let's talk about why those kids that were randomly labeled as gifted grew so much more. Upon receiving the IQ results at the conclusion of the study, the researchers...
Is that the Pygmalion effect? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Researchers asked the teachers if they treated the bloomers any differently than the other students. The only difference they reported was spending slightly less time with them. But in follow-up studies similar to this one, researchers found that teachers do in fact treat bloomers just slightly differently. They create a warmer emotional climate for them, more encouragement, more support, and one-on-one attention. Bloomers get more material, harder material. The teachers give them better feedback and more opportunities to respond in class and longer to respond. In a nutshell, the expectation that these kids are going to be smarter creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where teachers ensure that their preconceptions become reality, which is something that doesn't happen if there are no preconceptions. And look, if you think I'm saying that us consuming reviews for games is just like teachers consuming advanced aptitude tests for students and that our perceptions of those games are entirely molded by our expectations, then yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. If a game has dazzling reviews, you might give it just a little bit more leniency than you would if that exact same game was surrounded by negative noise.
Yeah, and I was honestly thinking earlier, well, watching this video, whether or not I should actually give a review for Persona 5, because this is one of the games where I really desperately wanted to like it more than I did, but I didn't, and I kind of fell off of it, and I feel a kind of sense of guilt from it, which is really strange because, long story short, like I was a huge fan of the Mega 10 series, or Shin Megami Tensei series, of which Persona is a spin-off of, for a very long time, and so seeing the absolutely gorgeous art style and the new direction that the game was going in really caught my eye. Like visually, it's absolutely stunning. I think it's still better than a majority of games that have released. Just like the strength of its art style alone really carries it. But moving beyond that, actually having played the game was a bit of a different experience for me, which I don't know why I fell off because I went and I mean I played Persona 4 Golden before Persona 5 came out and before it like got remastered and whatnot, and I platinumed that game. So why could I platinum Persona 4 Golden but not Persona 5? I don't exactly know why. My overall feedback for Persona 5 in comparison to the other games is that it felt like the pacing of the game for me was all over the place. And so it took too long to go through the story segments. Then it took too long to go through like the dungeons, and also trying to micromanage like the day-to-day activities. It just kind of sucked the fun out of it for me because I'm a person who like really stresses out about like min-maxing things, even if I'm not like looking up guides to do it. And I think that's part of it. Like knowing that there could have been a quote unquote better outcome than what I may have gone with just kind of eats at me because I'm very like focused on like efficiency and whatnot. And so there's something about the way that Persona 5 was designed that just turned me off of it because yeah, I don't know. I think like the very beginning of the game is way too long as far as like the tutorial goes. Talk about like good tutorialization. It's just like unironically when people play the game, I say that the tutorial is 40 hours long, and I don't actually think I'm wrong. I think I'm being like actually sincere when I say that, because I've seen a couple people like play through the game, and it's kind of true to an extent, depending on like how much they focus on actually paying attention to the text and whatnot. But anyway, going off subject here. What did he say before Persona 5 came up on the screen? I can't remember. Even the Rise quotes? Social... Could you elaborate, Astenex? I'm missing the context. P4 has a better soundtrack, that's why? That's one hell of a statement. I know like a lot of people really enjoy the P5 soundtrack. I think there are some like really good bangers on P5, but I don't know if I could like actually stack the two soundtracks and say which one is better. For companies, game as a product does not matter. It's all about the storefronts. Wings of Liberty made less money than the first shot mountain. Wow. Oof. The plat requires 250 unique quotes from Rise's navigation. That's hard. If that was necessary for P4 Golden, then I must have done it. It's been so long since I've played. Like I played it when it was new, and since I platinumed it, I was like, okay, I don't really need to play this anymore. Yeah. Okay. So, oh yeah, the Pygmalion effect. I was thinking of like sharing a story of like when I was a kid, because I mean, like what he says is right to a degree, and I definitely agree with the idea that reviews shape expectations. Okay, that's what it was with Persona. So yeah, my issue with Persona in general is my guilt comes from the fact that this should have been a game that I liked more than I did on multiple metrics. My own like personal metrics of like having a familiarity with the series in the past, really enjoying it, really liking what they did with the art style and things like that. But something about the way that the actual gameplay was structured turned me away from it, and I feel like a little bit of a buyer's remorse from that. So, and some of that really just comes from like the pressure that I think other people inadvertently put on players experiencing P5, because like the P5 fan base is rabid to say the least.
And the reverse is also true. If everyone says it's garbage, you might be less inclined to patience when you're playing it, because even if we don't consciously mean to, those pre-constructed beliefs still influence our perception. And this isn't just conjecture. There's a 2011 study on the impact of negative game reviews and user comments on player experience.
All right, I'm gonna copy and write this down. Where's my other notes? Okay, right here. The impact of negative game reviews and user comments on player experience. I really appreciate them. Ian Livingston. Why does that name look so familiar? Anyway, I'm not from Saskatchewan, for anybody wondering. So anyway, I lost my train of thought.
That found that consuming both professional reviews and user comments, especially the negative ones, affected player experience with those games, even when you control for player mood. And interestingly, the authority of the source did not matter. They found this effect for both. This echoes another 2022 study on online reviews I dug up that found that we are not that great at identifying fake comments and reviews. Regardless of the legitimacy or accuracy of the social information we get, we clearly cannot help but be affected by the valence of it. There's even more evidence of that in this 2019 eye tracker study, where researchers were testing the comment section's effect on YouTube videos. Participants were presented videos with either positive or negative comments, and when the groups with only negative comments on their screen chose to read them, they enjoyed the video notably less than those who did not pay attention to the comments or were only presented with positive ones, despite the fact that it was the same video for all groups. What I'm trying to say is, simply seeing a review at all cannot not influence your time with the game it's about.
And I feel like a lot of this makes sense. Like, there's the whole analogy of a rotten apple spoils the bunch, and I think that's very true with negative comments or just negativity in general, which is why I do think it's important to kind of try and actively foster a more positive community, so that way the negativity doesn't like stick around, which is kind of a difficult thing to do, but I think just overall in the long run it's more worth it, because the rotten apples spoiled the bunch.
No, of course a game is not a child
Observation
trying to teach,
paradox.
but it
We
was
got
impossible for those
Schrodinger's
teachers not to
reviewer
at
in
least
chat.
subconsciously consider those test results during their time instructing those students, and it is impossible for you to just completely not consider a review during your time with the game. If you are flooded with negativity around it, even if the source of that negativity is just weird buzz on social media, the source, as we can see, doesn't matter. It plants an expectation, a doubt.
So within the context of the authority of the source does not matter, I guess my question is, why should it? Because earlier in this video, he pointed out that critics and the larger audience tended to agree on the overall quality of like the thing that they're consuming. And so if that is generally true, then I could understand why the authority of the source wouldn't matter here either.
Source, as we can see, doesn't matter. It plants an expectation, a doubt, a promise, a flaw, a guarantee, even if it's just a tiny one that takes root in your subconscious. And I think many of us realize this to a certain degree, and in turn, actively try to avoid too many reviews. Like a lot of you pointed out, we want to know if a game is broken, but for the most part, many of us find that it's much more of an enjoyable experience when we form our own opinions with as little information as possible. If the buzz is that it's good, but we don't know exactly why, that's just enough for us to give it an optimistic go, and it's how a great many people find hidden gems. But again, many of us are well aware that reviews strongly affect our time with games, leaving us in the same shoes as those teachers. Expectations mold experience, and there's... Oh yeah, we need a counter argument, don't we? What if those kids were taught by the people that hate The Last of Us Part 2? What if they got those exams back and said, bullshit! This child is far from a 10 out of 10, and I refuse to acknowledge that it's canon. I'm really stretching the limits of this metaphor. Do you think these kids would have had the highest IQ scores at the end of the year? Probably not. In fact, the teachers would have likely acted in such a way that confirms their opinion, an opinion that is in direct conflict with the scores that were given. So if you've ever seen a low review score for a game, really didn't want it to be true, and then you felt like that game was actually fantastic when you finally played it, your preconceptions from that review were likely still affecting your time with it. The only difference is, it was sort of a self-defeating prophecy. You didn't play the game to enjoy it or see it as it is. You played it to right a wrong, make a point, fulfill your own prophecy. You played...
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that personally. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to doubt what they're saying. I'm just like thinking about my personal experiences of like reviews in video games. Um, I think the one that stands out to me of like a game that was kind of mediocre and I didn't want it to be mediocre. I wanted it to be better than it was, but it wasn't. Was Star Ocean 5? Wait, is it 5? Or is it 6? Anyway, um I can't remember. Like it was one of the Star Oceans, and it's very mid, to say the least. Which doesn't mean like it was a bad game, but most of the reviews that came out for it were like a 6 or a 7, or maybe a 7 and an 8. And I wanted it to be better because I liked the old Star Ocean games, and they were right. And it kind of sucked to realize that.
Played it looking for evidence to the contrary, being more critical than that reviewer was, being more forgiving than that critic was. In that moment, you were an outlier. And my point still stands. Expectations still shaped your experience, just in the opposite direction of what
Hey, Saturn,
you were
nice to
told.
see you again.
To really
Welcome
nail
to
this
stream.
down, there was a study done last year that found that when people watched a review and felt like they and the reviewer were alike, in this case the similarity being what NFL team they root for, their purchase intent was lower if they saw a 1-star review than a 5-star review. Sure, makes sense. But when they felt unlike the reviewer, if it was a fan of a different team, the 1-star review generated significantly higher purchase intent than the 5-star review. Essentially, when it's someone you don't identify with or you think has a dramatically different perspective than you, it can actually boost your likelihood to buy the product they are thrashing. And there will obviously always be disagreements about reviews, right? That's what makes them good conversation starters. There will always be buzz you don't.
It's kind of fascinating to think about. So maybe I should make more incendiary content to farm the hate views. Is that the takeaway that I need to get from this video?
Yet, there will always be hate for a game that you feel is wildly unwarranted. The point of me talking about this is not to say that people are just disagreeing to disagree, it's that it's impossible to consume reviews or buzz about a game and it just not affect how you see that game moving forward. And that's not a bad thing. We're social creatures. We want our thoughts to be compared to others, and that's evidenced by a lot of the comments I received saying that many of you actually check reviews for games after you play. I did a poll on Twitter and 2/3 of you admitted to doing exactly that because you want to see if your opinions are right. I'm so happy someone actually said this. But there
Yeah, I feel similarly where I don't want to go into most games or most things with other people's thoughts in my head before I get to experience it for myself and form my own feelings. So that's going to be a bit of an interesting experience as I go into Lies of P blind with the chat, because I'm sure like some people are going to end up backseating whether they mean to or not, and I'm going to try to like not judge anybody like doing that, because if I watch a streamer and they're playing a game and I'm passionate about it, I often get very what's the word? Man, it was like on the tip of the tongue, and then I lost it, and I feel like I can't move forward. So if I'm very passionate about a game and I see somebody playing it, I often get not motivated. Anyway, like I feel like I want to participate and share my excitement, and inadvertently end up backseating the game, even if I don't necessarily mean to, just because it comes from like a place of excitement. Or like sometimes I forget that like what experiences I have somebody else may not have had. So like if somebody picks up an item, I'm like, oh yeah, this item is freaking great. I really enjoyed it. That might inadvertently color their perception of like what they wanted. Like they may not have thought that it was a great item, and that might like make them feel like what they're currently using isn't great if somebody else isn't like recommending that or is recommending something different and whatnot. And so yeah, I just don't know how the whole like blind playthrough is going to go. I'm sure it'll be fine, but it's just something I haven't done yet, so I'm a little bit apprehensive about it. Invested, maybe that was the word. Oh yeah, and checking reviews after. Been playing Lies of P, definitely a personal 10 out of 10. I can't wait to poop on it, Clown Scum, and then that'll make you angry and spend more money? Question mark? Yeah. You do the same thing, so you'll not watch me play Liza P. It's all good. Yeah. You promise you'll only backseat it with explaining mechanics? We know how Souls-like are? Okay. You have strong opinions on Maliketh and Farum, so when you get to those videos, that will be interesting. Alright, nice. So, I was going to say something else. Did Stella say it? Invested? No. Oh yeah, Scowl Easy, and checking reviews after the fact. Yeah, because I am a pretty opinionated person. I like to see what resonated with me versus how others may have felt about that. And sometimes I think looking at other people's reviews can give me a deeper appreciation for something, or vice versa, which is part of the fun of like looking at the reviews. It's like it's not just, is my opinion right? It's like I would love somebody else to convince me that their opinion is beautiful in its own way, and I can appreciate that. Like that is like absolutely baller to me. So one example of that, and this is going to be like some obscure music thing, but there used to be a track by a band that I really enjoyed. Let me rephrase that. I enjoyed the band very much so, but one particular track I did not like pretty much at all. There's nothing going for it for me personally. And then I read an interview where the band had talked about like how they made this song specifically and how they used twin guitars to work on like this kind of harmony. And then with that perspective in mind, I went back and listened to the song, and I was able to appreciate something that I couldn't before because I just had a different mindset or a different like reference point than necessary to like kind of work with that. And so I think the same experience can come in from like game reviews. So I'm trying to think of some of like the more recent game reviews that I saw, but I mean, I don't really actually watch a lot. I'm trying to think of like the ones from Lords of the Fallen with Smotown or Ratatosker, but I don't really remember having like that kind of eureka moment where something different from how I felt was really brought to light. So maybe I'm struggling. Anyway. Hi, man. How's it going? You're back from Carcosa. How do I do? I'm doing pretty well. You missed all of our streams playing Alundra, although that might have been intentional, and I don't blame you. So yeah, we're back to doing our regularly scheduled video responses and whatnot. And I'm taking way too long to think about these shorter videos, and we're probably going to only get to like maybe one video about actual Elden Ring lore and whatnot tonight.
There is a kernel of truth to that notion. A lot of times we want validation that we weren't the only ones that enjoyed playing. What did other people like? What did I miss? Did you guys hate this as much as I did? Am I crazy? Why does everyone like this? Why doesn't anyone else like this?
Oh yeah, so this isn't necessarily from a review, but I remember after playing Dark Souls 1, I was like, what the hell was that all about? And so I watched a couple videos and was like, wait, who the hell is Koth? You know? And so like there was this entire world of the game that I was missing out on that actually kind of makes the game for me. The fact of Koth's existence to kind of throw shade and doubt on the story of like the chosen undead and being like this very vanilla, bland, knight saves the day, saves the world kind of story. Just really opened new horizons for me and my appreciation of Dark Souls. And that is just something that I would have completely missed on my own if I hadn't looked at videos afterward.
Of course, a big part of this is certainly much deeper than, is it actually good or bad? Like maybe you just want to hear other people's interpretation of that game, and that's certainly why essay-style reviews like what you find here are pretty popular. But consuming reviews after you finish games takes that social information and plants it in a healthier spot in time when we are more ready to actually process another person's opinion. I told you a little bit of a half-lie earlier. Remember that 2011 study where the reviews affected player enjoyment of a game? Well, the next month they ran it again, this time placing physiological sensors on gamers when they played. Afterwards, the players still reported the same results as before, enjoying games more or less depending on the valence of the review they happened to be assigned, but during play, physiologically, there was no difference. Both groups actually had the same experience, but they remembered them differently. The researchers proposed that reading reviews does not directly affect play experience, but rather is a post-play cognitive rationalization of the experience with the content of the review. Our minds have a need to resolve what is just processed, and often...
And this makes me want to rethink about how I approach reviews, because I tend to be, I don't want to say like negative, maybe critical is the word to use instead. I tend to be overly critical, and that's just kind of part of my nature of being like really pedantic about things. And if in the grander scheme of things that is inadvertently lessening other people's enjoyment of the game, is that something that I want to move away from moving forward? On one hand, like, my knee-jerk response is to say no, I don't really care, and just want to make the content that I want to make and be selfish because that feels good. But on the other hand, it sure would be nice to have nicer things in the world. I don't know. I think there could be a little bit of balance of both, or maybe it just takes a bit more work in framing things in such a way where things that I'm criticizing doesn't come off as being negative or nitpicky. But yeah, that's just, I guess that's just gonna require some personal growth to be able to pull off such a feat. So maybe that could just be like a goal to work towards or strive to, but if I don't meet it, that's kind of okay too. I don't know. More lore was very much why the hell does everybody like this about the Soulsborne games? And then you got really angry at not understanding things, so you just decided to play all of them on your own. And then you didn't get it until you played Elden Ring, and then it finally clicked. Cost you a lot of money, but you finally understood. Nice. That's kind of wild to me that you were stubborn enough to go through all those other games before it clicked. I mean, I don't know exactly which ones you played, but congratulations. Did you go back to the other ones and look on them with more fondness with this newfound realization, or do you still hate them?
It looks to others to do so. Reviews, opinions, and social commentary help us make sense of what we've just played, but when you consume all of that before doing the actual playing, that rationalization is often made for you, even if it's the same grand old time you would have had without that commentary. So, what do we make of this? What's the point in knowing this? Do we stop looking at reviews? Do we need to get off social media? Yes to that last one, but I think as with most things, we all need to find a healthy balance. I cannot in good faith tell you that I think you should stop looking at reviews before you decide whether or not to pick up a title, because it would be extremely hypocritical of me. They are a fantastic resource if you are, as many of you pointed out, on the fence about a game or are looking for something new and exciting. But maybe take what you read with a grain of salt, since there is evidence that we have a hard time distinguishing the quality of what we read before we've played. Find us.
And so that argument right there doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And maybe I just need to like go back and rewatch like the beginning portion of the video, because he said that quite often the critic review aligns with the audience review. And so with that in mind, I don't think the authority of the source should matter. And even like more broadly speaking, I tend to be anti-authority in general, and I don't think the authority of something has any bearing over the correctness of it, the rightness of it. And so you could have like the biggest jerk in the world who says something, and people might have the knee-jerk reaction of like wanting to disagree because the dude's a jerk. But I mean, if he's right, he's right, nothing you could really do about that. So in many ways, I don't think the authority of the source should matter, but I don't know. I had something else to go along with that, but I'm blanking. Global Sequence says, I could go full hater mode like Ratatosker. He admits it proudly. You think he's hilarious? Yeah. It's kind of funny because in many ways, I do think Ratatosker and I have the kind of a dry delivery style. So I might be able to adopt something like him. But I feel like his dryness is more crisp than mine. And so I think his method of delivery might work better for him on that front. Whereas I fear that I just sound a little bit too like nitpicky. I don't know. He sounds like more precise in a way that I don't. I don't know. Don't know how to explain it any better than that. Yeah, as Morlor says, insert the worst person you know just made a great point meme. Yeah, and so should it really matter if some Joe off the street makes a negative comment that can color your perception? Maybe, maybe not. I think it'd be interesting to look at these subjects as to whether or not those comments have any merit, because I think that's kind of what really drives home some of these points. Like if somebody says something negative, does it matter if that negative thing that is said is true or is feasible, plausible? I don't know. I can imagine that like saying something so egregiously untrue might not influence anybody's feelings at all, but that might not actually be true. And if that's the case, then I do think we would need to be much more careful of how we frame things. And by we, this is kind of like more of a royal we, like me personally. Although, just in a more like idealistic sense, it would be perhaps good for the audience too as well. I don't know. Stella says, for what it's worth, a few dry nitpicks sound better than if they were whiny tinged or ragey nitpicks. Yeah, I just kind of worry that I sound a bit more whiny than dry, I suppose. And I'm sure like me hesitating about all this right now doesn't do me any favors either.
We have a hard time distinguishing the quality of what we read before we've played. Find a source you trust and be aware that there are emotionally charged outliers out there. Remember that even if you try to ignore them, simply seeing them in the timeline or on a review board will mold your time with the game ever so slightly.
And yeah, that's true. I tend to also be surprised, a contrarian for also being like anti-authority. Who could have imagined those two would go together? And so that makes me even more reluctant to give Lies of P a fair shake, and I kind of know that about myself. So that's another part of my apprehension about like streaming that game live, because I'm already kind of negative about it, but that's because of some of the trailers that I saw earlier about the game just didn't attract a lot of my positive feelings toward the game. So I'm very willing to be pleasantly surprised. I hope I am, but I don't know. I just don't want to like be negative about a game that like a lot of people like just because I'm being a negative Nancy, I suppose. A contrarian that doesn't like DS2, that would be double contrarian, making you the truest contrarian there is. Yeah. So I mean, just because I'm contrarian doesn't mean that I'm not true to myself. And that doesn't mean that DS2 isn't a good game. Or is that too many negatives? Anyway, DS2 bad.
So maybe if it's a game you're excited to try, stay away from social media the week or so before it comes out, and then gauge opinions once you're done. The point of this was to simply say that reviews affect you more than you think. Even if you don't talk about it, there's probably a game or two out there that you really like or would have liked that other people have convinced you is actually bad. Or maybe it's vice versa, you don't actually like it that much, but it's still a masterpiece though, somehow. Expectations are unshakable in some ways, but I think that being aware of their effect on you can help you better understand how to manage them and get the most out of reviews. We can't play anything in a vacuum, but don't let too many other opinions get in until you're good and ready. Just go play that shit, baby. Enjoy yourself. Or hate every second of it. It's up to you. Just make sure that it really is up to you. What's up, Chief? I hope you enjoyed this one. If you're new here, I do a video like this every month, and if you happened to miss this video I posted about a year ago, you've arrived at a great time. Essentially, I made a video explaining how I would tackle my backlog in 1 year's time, and next month, it's finally time to cover what happened, if I finished it, what I've learned, and maybe how you can do the same thing. So be sure to go check that out if you missed it, and if you didn't, go give it another watch to recap. If you like what you see here and want to support the show, give my Patreon a look. For $1 a month, you can get access to monthly bonus content including cozy interactive live streams, creative inputs, weekly updates, bloopers, and more. A huge shout out to this month's featured patrons: Jose Fernandez, Sly Merlin, Got Copper, Luna Ravenclaw, Diablo Neminis, Tyler Matthew Boulware, Sarah Hassard, and last but not least, Marum. Thanks again for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know below how much reviews have affected you in the past, and as always, have yourself a damn good one.
So that was a good video. I've gone ahead and linked it into chat if you want to give Daryl Talks Games some love with a like and or a sub. There was definitely another video on my list of his that I wanted to watch. I don't remember what it is. So I should probably sub. Yeah, it was this one. We consume fiction wrong. It does kind of kill me that it's wrong instead of like incorrectly, making it more of an adverb, but how Souls games save you. I hate that. I hate that. I hate all the sappy Dark Souls saved my life stuff, but I guess it must be true because there's so many of those videos out there. Spoiler alert, I have not watched a single one. I just... Not that sentimental, I suppose. Stories that use time to hurt you. Oh yeah, that was another one that looked interesting to me. So I'm going to go ahead and give him a sub. Alright. If you want to get a ton more people watching me play Liza P, you can tell their Discord you're going to stream it. The lore guys would probably want to see my reactions. So I actually hardly look at... this might be surprising. I don't want to say like I hardly look at lore, but I can barely focus on it on a first playthrough of a game like a Souls-like game. I mean, I'll read things, but I just don't really absorb it that well because I'm like more focused on the other stuff. So yeah, I don't necessarily know if I want to like farm. I mean, yeah, I don't like the idea of farming in different communities for like viewers and whatnot. I do like the whole idea of like more organic growth, but maybe, I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing to say as a content creator. It's like, oh no, I don't actually want viewers, but it's kind of true. I don't know. Chadwick says, the thing you never heard him say is it's okay to change your mind. You can be wrong, but maintain your integrity if you just accept it. It's okay to adjust. That's a really good point right there, Chadwick, that it is okay to change your mind. And that's something that I think it's actually really difficult to do. And it's something that I have struggled with for a very long time since I was a child, because I was, one of these quote unquote gifted kids. So the Pygmalion effect and whatnot may have like affected me. I definitely know like I was given like more preferential treatment as a child in school than other children, despite everything, probably because I was gifted, but also because I was a gigantic pain in the ass. So it's just probably extra frustrating for a lot of my teachers just because I didn't want to focus so much because school was boring as hell to me. So anyway, yeah. You think Liza P has better bosses than base Bloodborne, but don't tell the BB fanboys you said that. I mean, I don't really blame you. I've been a pretty vocal critic of the parts where I believe Bloodborne is weak, and I will admit that the base bosses for Bloodborne aren't the best. However, I do think those issues are like more like the later half of the game, whereas I feel like Bloodborne has a really strong opening crew, I guess. I don't know what to call it. Oh, that sounds cool, Scaleezy. It's pretty overwhelming. Okay. Hey, Elden Enthusiast, nice to see you again. The fact, I mean, hold on, let me When you guys type LOP, I'm like half dyslexic sometimes, and I'm like, oh, they're talking about me. It's Liza P. That's kind of been throwing me for a loop this entire night. Um, the pure fact that Liza P is based on Pinocchio and has a relatively clean aesthetic compared to Bloodborne biased you against it, and it's just now after so many positive things you've heard of it that you're willing to give it a try. Yeah, it's all good. You don't need to apologize for that. It's just this is the me problem, not a you problem. Bloodborne's legitimately the worst Souls game made by FromSoft, unless we count the Demon Souls remake, which is a weird sort of middle ground. Hold on, let me ban some people from the chat real quick. No, okay, you're fine. All right, so that was a pretty good video by Daryl Talks Games. I'm definitely curious at some of their other stuff. I did really consider about like the whole consuming fiction wrong for tonight as well, but maybe we'll get that one out of the way later in the week.
Hey everybody,
All right, so next we've got another video by Honored Man talking about how Marika betrayed Maliketh. So, bit of a change in directions here, but a good one. We've been watching a lot of Honored Madman lately, but he's just been putting out a ton of content, and it's been pretty good. So, I guess we're gonna keep rolling with it. So yeah, this is a topic that what can even really be said about it? This is a topic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Honored Madman, and unlike yesterday's video, today's actually will be bite-sized, hopefully. So yesterday I talked a lot about how Maliketh was technically a failure, but he's not necessarily responsible for the fallout of events that followed the Night of Black Knives. For example, the spread of the Deathblight, that's hardly his fault. He's not the one who chose to bury Godwyn down there at the roots of the great tree. But I neglected to mention
Or is he? Michael Vsauce here.
The fact that it was confirmed that he was betrayed by Marika. It says so right in his remembrance. So I figured in today's short little lore entry that we would explore how Marika betrayed her beastly half-brother. So it's not outwardly stated how she betrayed him anywhere, but there is a lot of evidence.
Oh, what's the name of the BGM track here? I don't remember the actual name of it. I'm pretty confident this was used in Shadow Tower, one of the other FromSoft games. I know Zoli the Witch uses it all the time in those videos,
Pointing to the fact that she may have had a hand in the Night of Black Knives. But let's get right into it. So when Ranni was pulling off this theft that allowed her to enact the Night of Black Knives, we know for a fact that she needed help stealing the Rune of Death, and while we know her brother Rykard must have had a hand in it, as he was granted those traces that allowed him to parry the Black Blade if they ever were to come to blows, personally I think he had a hand in the theft itself. Perhaps he was the only one brave enough and that hated the Golden Order enough to attempt this. Well, him or agents loyal to him at least, I think that also might be more likely. Or perhaps he created a diversion that allowed the theft to happen. Maybe he drew Maliketh away from his guard post and thieves, either sent by Ranni or Rykard, managed to make off with the Rune of Death. But here's the thing, for any of this to have happened, Ranni would have needed inside info on how to find the rune, which would surely have been well guarded, probably by Maliketh himself.
I absolutely love when Ronnie is called Randy by the closed captions.
This could have only been provided by Marika or someone extremely close to her, which most people will think is probably just the Newman women that we know to have become the Black Knife Assassins. But I don't think there's any reason to believe that any of them would act without her order or behind her back in any way. First of all, there's very few Newmen even in the world. We know that Marika was a Newman. Now, besides being a not-so-subtle Lord of the Rings reference, the Newman people are unique in a lot of ways. They're the supposed descendants of another world, long-lived but seldom born. The Japanese translation elaborates on this a little further, where the characters used could mean another world, or they could be referring to the underworld, which I feel like kind of hints at the fact that they come from the Eternal Cities, which are...
So, right, the way that this works is, hold on, let me pull up my spreadsheet. Is this worth it? No, I'll just talk about it. So anyway, before going into that, ZiteL0, welcome into the chat, and you said the track, I believe, is Dark Reality in Kingsfield. Okay, thank you. So maybe I was definitely wrong about Shadow Tower there. Appreciate that. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So, Ikai. So the way that this kanji works here,
which I feel like...
so some of you in chat may be familiar with the term isekai, which is like a kind of genre of like anime. And the whole premise is that the characters get sent to another world. So if you take isekai, but you drop the character in the middle, so you just have ikai, that's what shows up in the description that Honored Madman had just mentioned. So the characters on their own could just mean like different world essentially, but the reason why this has connotations of it being the underworld is because in real life we don't really often talk about other worlds in the sense of like other realities. And so if you're talking about an other world, it tends to be like the next world, the spirit world, the afterlife, that kind of thing. So while in a sense he is correct in saying that this word can have connotations of meaning the underworld specifically, those connotations may or may not be present as far as that description goes in Elden Ring, and the Newman and whatnot could be part of a kind of like different or alien world. So, I'm less inclined to say that it means it in the sense of spirit world, because we do actually have a reference to a spirit world with the Helfen steeple. I think they call it the Reikai. Pretty confident. And while they could be the same thing, it's interesting that they use different terms. I tend to think of the Lands Between as kind of like the equivalent of Neverland, where it kind of exists across the fog, the galactic sea, and whatnot. And so it's kind of like its own continent in the Dreamlands. Not literally, but kind of. And the Newmen may just be like the Tinkerbells that are able to traverse in between the Lands Between and the Not. Don't ask me about the Tarnished in this analogy. Just kind of roll with it, please. All right. Truck-kun is your favorite isekai character?
It kind of hints at the fact that they come from the eternal cities, which are, well, under the world. The Japanese version also refers to them as Marabito, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but it literally means rare person. The word itself is rather ancient, and itself refers to a supernatural being who comes from afar, bringing gifts of wisdom, spiritual knowledge, and happiness. Oh yeah, that totally sounds like Marika or the other Newman we encounter. And aside from
And Marabito does kind of have the connotations of being related to divinity, or maybe not divinity. I want to say spirituality, but that doesn't make sense with how that word works in English, but hopefully the sentiment gets across in that it's like a wandering spirit can kind of like come by and bless you and take care of you. Anyway, I'm just really failing to articulate this. So I'll just fall back to my Tinkerbell comparison, because I think that's like the closest thing where like Tinkerbell is a spiritual being, question mark, and she kind of acts in some ways like a fairy godmother to Peter Pan and the Lost Boys and the Lost Children and Wendy and whatnot. But she's not like all benevolent or anything like that. She definitely gets up to mischief and whatnot. And so the same idea can like be transmitted from the idea of like a Maribito. It could be a visitor from afar, or it could just literally be like a guest who's like visiting you from not so afar in the sense of like another world, but what it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I guess I'm just kind of like going off on tangents here. Anyway, unseen aid, a little bit. Tarnished equals the children and fairy dust equals grace. Oh no.
from Queen Marika and possibly the player character if you pick Newman as your race, the Black Knife Assassins are the only other Newman in the game. Well, except for maybe those giant ants that drop Newman runes. So in more ways than one, the lore hits us over the head with the fact that Newman are in fact very rare. And if we look around, the Black Knife Assassins all appear to be guarding things. For the most...
Alright, so that was the whole point. So like calling the Newman rare, I mean, it doesn't literally mean it quite that way. but it's not like too important. Anyway, yeah, okay. The Newmen are eaten by ants, potentially.
Places that Marika would care about. The only time we ever see them acting as actual assassins is when they killed Godwin and everybody else, and of course when they attempt to kill Blythe and succeed in killing Iji. And not only that, but the Black Knife assassins are all referred to as having close ties to Marika by Sorcerer Rajir and in in-game text. And while that does seem a little too obvious for my liking, it seems more than likely that they were acting on her orders or she loaned them to Ranni, but we haven't really got to the why. Like, why would Marika do this? To what end? What does all of this accomplish? Well, in a lot of ways, it sets the stage rather nicely for the Shattering. On one hand, you've got the chance that maybe Marika did all this so she could have an excuse to bound death and basically begin sowing seeds for the Shattering to happen. We know Marika was probably trying to free herself from the Greater Will and maybe even use Radagon as her sort of scapegoat replacement so she could get out, but that's something.
So let me back that up. I want to try to absorb that a bit more.
Or acting on her orders, or she loaned them to Ranni, but we haven't really got to the why. Like, why would Marika do this? To what end? What does all of this accomplish? Well, in a lot of ways, it sets the stage rather nicely for the Shattering. On one hand, you've got the chance that maybe Marika did all this so she could have an excuse to bound death and basically begin sowing seeds for the Shattering to happen.
I can see where he might be coming from with that angle, but I am kind of worried about what exactly that means to him because he hasn't set that up that much. And this isn't like necessarily anything against Honored Madman here, but part of the reason why I'm a little bit apprehensive now is just because like this is one of those topics where so many people have different interpretations on what exactly that means. I don't know his actual frame of reference here, so I don't know how to feel about his perspective at this particular moment. So I might need to like pause and like figure this out a little bit more as we continue.
We know Marika was probably trying to free herself from the Greater Will and maybe even use Radagon as her sort of scapegoat replacement so she could get out, but that's something I'm going to talk a lot more about in the Radagon video. Now, on the other hand, there's the chance that Marika did help Ranni with this, but that Godwin's death was Ranni altering the deal. I think it's very likely that she was okay with all the other demigods' deaths because, well, they weren't even important enough to be named. The best those demigods got were the walking mausoleum treatment. I guess it isn't so bad. They've got some of the most metal guardians in the game. I mean, those guys were loyal enough to sever their heads to serve their lords in death. So they did have some people cared about those demigods, but I do not think Marika did. Godwin, however, was different. I mean, look at all the statues there are of her carrying his corpse. At least, that's what I think.
Okay, I was just about to criticize that. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily read that this is Godwin, and I would say that there's probably a lot of reasons to suggest that this is not him, if you believe that the existence of these catacombs predate the Shattering, which I think, is... There's not a lot of solid evidence for that, but I think it's kind of self-evident regardless.
The statues of. It's above like every crypt in Altus, I believe. Now, if this was the case, then
not exactly. It's above every hero's grave, I believe. So there's just kind of a couple more in Altus specifically. So there is the one by Malgelmir, but the most interesting thing to me about these statues specifically is despite this dude being headless, they're all oriented and pointing towards the Erd Tree, which is kind of cool. Godwin looks like an old aristocrat, lol, yeah.
She did get what she wanted. She got the excuse she needed to bound death. But it did come at great cost, and it left her really bitter about the whole thing, which could be why the Black Knife assassins hunt down Ranni's accomplices after she, dips out and they're no longer protected by a demigod. This could also explain why Godwin was buried at the roots of the Great Tree. It could be seen as Marika in a way salting the earth because she knows Ranni was out there attempting to now establish her own order and going against Marika's wishes. I mean, we know Marika must have some knowledge of Deathblight because look at what happened to the giants in the mountaintops. And to me, this could also...
And this isn't exactly Deathblight either. It's definitely not Deathblight because the weird thorns are different. They don't have like eyes and flies coming out of them, which isn't too important. I have wondered whether or not this was originally the aftermath of Godwin potentially fighting the giants, and that is something I still do wonder about, but we just don't really have answers. I think he said something else, but I kind of lost my thoughts on that. Hey, Rabid Baptism, welcome into the stream. Could Marika travel dimensions? The Tarnished can, you think? Are those fingers from her hand? I'm not sure which fingers you're talking about there, but if Marika is a Newman, I do think there is a strong possibility that the Newman could travel between dimensions, and whether or not traveling dimensions just means like going beyond the Sea of Fog is debatable. Those are Thorns of Sin, right? They are most close to the Thorns of Sin, correct? However, it is unclear if they are actually the same kind of thorns. And if so, like, why the hell are these guys pierced by Thorns of Sin, but like the Erdtree forces never seem to use them themselves, and they're kind of affiliated with heretics, is one thing that I wonder about that. And that's like not to take anything away from your idea there. It's just this is like one of the number of messes within Elden Ring's lore that we don't really have direct answers for. Scally says Deathblight wasn't a thing until Godwin was buried, right? Yes, and so that is another reason why this cannot be Deathblight. I was just kind of like focusing on the visual stuff, but Scally Easy is perfectly right there to point out that how could this stuff be Deathblight if the giants were killed before, well before the Shattering, essentially?
Also explain why Mikola was working towards resurrecting Godwin. I think there's even a chance that Marika was planning on being a part of Mikola's new order, at least when she made the decision to help Ranni with her plot in the first place. And through all this, Maliketh just wound up as the unfortunate casualty of scheming gods. While every demigod may have feared him, the true god betrayed him and didn't give it a second thought. So I'd say how Marika betrayed Maliketh is pretty clear, but why isn't so easy to figure out.
Wait, I'm actually unclear why what he thinks is clear.
Now establish her own order and going against Marika's wishes. I mean, we know Marika must have some knowledge of Deathblight because look at what happened to the giants in the mountaintops. And
Right,
to
I
me, this
disagree
could
with
also
that.
explain why Mikola was working towards resurrecting Godwin. I think there's even a chance that Marika was planning on being a part of Mikola's new order, at least when she made the decision to help Ranni with her plot in the first place. And through all this, Maliketh just wound up as the unfortunate casualty of scheming gods. While every demigod may have feared him, the true god betrayed him and didn't give it a second thought. So I'd say how Marika betrayed Maliketh is pretty clear, but why isn't so easy to figure out.
Alright, so he just thinks it's clear in that Marika was a co-conspirator with Ranni, and that's like the betrayal. Okay, I don't necessarily agree with that. I also don't fully disagree with that either, which is why I'm kind of a perpetual fence sitter on this topic so far. There's a lot of Erdtree Faith using a thing and then going, oh no, that's bad. But yeah, there isn't anything about the Synthorns having ever been a mainstream thing with the Erdtree Faithful. And that's just kind of like, I mean, I feel like despite, George R.R. Martin's influence, there's certainly a lot of things which don't seem to have a lot of neat, cohesive ties in the lore. By ties, I mean like that they're tied up nicely, essentially, or like they're self-contained. Yeah. All right, thank you, Morlor.
But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Like, why do you guys think Marika betrayed him? I mean, it is quite fucked up. I don't want to get too off topic, and the video is already like 5 minutes long, so I'm going to cut it off there. Today's video was supposed to be about the brothers D, but that'll be tomorrow because I couldn't stop kicking myself in the head for forgetting about Maliketh's remembrance description, and how it blatantly stated that Marika betrayed him. Anyway though, I hope you guys found this rather short video somewhat entertaining, somewhat informative, and if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble from various different amounts of time, please consider subscribing because that really helps me here out at the channel. But as
Alright, so one of my concerns is about the whole notion of Marika needing to bind death within Maliketh. So I don't entirely disagree with that. We just have a lot of open-ended questions about the lore, which makes it hard for me to want to commit to something if it's still like subject to change. So, presumably before Ronnie initiated the Night of Black Knives, even though the Rune of Death was removed from the Elden Ring, it wasn't necessarily bound within the flesh of Maliketh. So it could have been within a sword, and then Ronnie chipped the hell out of it to get a fragment of the Rune of Death, with which she imbued the Black Knives with their power, and used all that to kill both herself and Godwin. So was, in Honored Madman's perspective here, was that all a goal of Marika, so that way Maliketh would take Destined Death and put it within his body and not use it again? That sounds like a little bit far-fetched to me, but to be fair, like almost everything as far as an explanation for that kind of sequence of events is going to be a little bit far-fetched, I think, to some degree. So I don't know. So I am a little bit curious about Honored Madman's thoughts on that sequence of events in general, in terms of like when Destined Death is bound, just because although he and I might agree right now, I just don't know where he's coming from, and I know there's so many other perspectives on the issue that I could agree with something, but that not actually be what he said or meant by what he said. So, okay. Nonetheless, let's go ahead and finish out the video. I'm going to go ahead and share it in the chat for you guys.
As always, let us have our outro and some final thoughts, maybe? So look, I don't necessarily think that the Black Knife Assassins taking out EG and attempting to take out Blythe really proves that Marika didn't want Godwin dead. She just as likely could be cleaning up loose ends that knew she did want Godwin dead. In this case, the loyal servants of Ranni, another one of the many pawns in her original plan. Although I can't say whether or not Marika was down with Ranni taking over, I doubt that. I do think that the Black Knife Assassins guarding the way into the Halig Tree kind of prove, or at least indicate, that Marika was helping Mikola with his whole Halig Tree situation. But these are greater mysteries that we will get into at a later date.
So yeah, I'm a little bit against the idea of pairing Marika and Mikola, if for no other reason than Mikola seemed to be more of a daddy's boy than a mama's boy. But we don't really know about that. Well, and of course, like the whole issue of like, well, what the hell does daddy's or mama's boy even really mean within the context of Maragon, you know? So anyway, moving past that. Without Horn says that they think the betrayal is shattering the ring, but you also can't wrap your mind around why Marika would do the Night of Black Knives to start with. And that's one of my biggest gripes about the lore of Elden Ring right now, is that we kind of know well, can I even really say that we know the facts of what happened? Well, setting that aside, we have a story of what happened, but that which irks me the most is that we have no indication as to the whys of the sequence of events happening the way that they did. And I feel like if you understand the characters' motivations, that would give us way more insight about like the actual events of the game than we currently have. And this didn't really bother me in a game like Dark Souls, because you're kind of working off of a framework that the world has kind of already passed on beyond that time, and it's just kind of languishing. But the fact that these key figures are still major players in the power schism of the Lands Between, and we can't ask them some of the most simple questions to just get a clearer picture of what's going on, just absolutely slays me. So it's like, you go up to Ranni, and you're like, hey Ranni, just like, who the hell are you? I didn't give you an invitation here. Or like, oh, I know you, but I didn't invite you here. Why are you here? And you're just like, yeah, your house was on this hill, and I wanted to see what was on the hill. You know, like the Tarnished are so freaking dumb and uninquisitive that it just destroys me. You can't just be like, yo, Ranni, what was all that about? Why'd you kill Godwin? Oh, okay. What was the Night of Black Knives about? She's like, no, I did it all. Be my servant. You're just like, okay. And then you just don't ask anything. anymore after that. So anyway, I guess it really makes a lot of sense that Ronnie would be fine with marrying the Tarnished because Ronnie's a puppet and the Tarnished is a puppet of Ronnie's, so it makes sense that the two puppets would get married, right? Anyway, jokes aside, Mordor thinks that Marika's betrayal of Maliketh is calling the Tarnished back to do their thing, which involves killing Maliketh. You're not super confident in this theory, but it's the one you feel is most correct. Whether or not it's correct is kind of impossible to say, but you might be onto something there just because it is technically unclear what the betrayal actually is. And that is one thing that has bothered me as well. We're told that Marika betrays Maliketh, but not to what extent and or why she betrayed Maliketh. So one possibility is that because Maliketh bound the rune of death within his flesh, that the betrayal could be, the Tarnished essentially coming back and killing Maliketh. I do think that's a really strong possibility. It could be everything with the Knight of Black Knives, which doesn't make a lot of sense as far as like the timeline goes. Or it could just be shattering the ring, which is another really popular theory. Or it could just be something else entirely that we don't really know of yet. So yeah, it's pretty rough out there. Not Marika calling the Tarnished, that was the fingers, but she had to set up the Tarnished, so you know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah, exactly. Could be making him eat Deathroot only to break the freaking ring. Yeah. You're going to say he's banished to Farum Azula, but he's in Caelid too. And even so, I wouldn't necessarily think that Maliketh was banished because he's set up as the Beast Clergyman, and he's the Beast Clergyman of Farum Azula. So Maliketh has an implicit connection to Farum Azula through that. And it's also really interesting to me that one of the rewards that he gives you is the Beast Claw Great Hammer or whatnot, which is supposed to depict Sirash on it. So that makes me wonder exactly how deep Marika's ties are to Farum Azula, which is actually a really good way to segue into our next video, I suppose, of where was Farum Azula before it's ruined by the Elden Conspiracy. So yeah, anyway, I did like this video from Honored Madman. I have linked it way up here in the chat if you guys want to give him a like and or a sub. We've been watching quite a bit of his content on the stream lately, and he's got a lot more content to go through. And as you guys can tell, he is a very active content creator, and he's still like putting stuff out really consistently, way more consistently than I can, which I definitely commend him for. And honestly, like a lot of it is pretty high quality stuff, despite him more or less just rambling into a microphone for like one session at a time and like just making a video out of it. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's different from the way that I make videos. I am a little bit envious of it, and maybe I should steal it, but I don't know. It's all good. So let's go ahead and transition into where was Farum Azula before it's ruined by the Elden Conspiracy. Alright.
Welcome to the Elden Conspiracy. Farum Azula is probably the subject I have covered the most on this channel, mostly because the area
Farum Azula was wild in the captions.
When arriving in Farum Azula and defeating its boss, our understanding of the world of Elden Ring is turned on its head. Being a floating city, having been struck by a meteorite and a storm of mysterious origin, there are many indications that Farum Azula was once on solid ground and connected to other regions. So in this video, I will examine the various extant theories about where Farum Azula was on land before it became a floating ruin. When we begin the game and look out on the breadth of Limgrave, one thing we all notice are the gigantic chunks of stone littering the landscape. Some of these ruins have a circular shape, and their carvings indicate they were made by an ancient civilization. The ruin fragment description calls this place a floating temple in the sky. These ruins of Farum Azula populate the western part of the lands between, specifically the Liurnia and Limgrave regions. Caelid does have several ruin chunks on its western side. The areas of Altus, Mount Gelmir and the mountaintops, as well as Eastern Caelid and Grail's Dragon Barrow do not have Farum Azula ruins. I believe the locations of the Farum
Okay, he's got a little map. I was going to point out that the only one in Caelid is right next to the Dragon Communion Cathedral, which I feel like is supposed to be relevant, but it's really annoying how spread apart the fragments are, yet also not. So it just doesn't make like a ton of sense based on where they fell. Actually, maybe this does make sense. Yeah, maybe this is just more evidence of the Pangea theory, where the lands between were more integrated at one point in time. And that, like, Liurnia, Limgrave may have been close together and ever so slightly attached to Caelid. And I do think Caelid and the mountaintops were more directly connected at one point in time. Like, if you want to do, like, the whole South America, Africa thing, you might be able to say, like, this connected there. But it's not too important. From the mountaintops, you can see, like, these fissures, which showed, like, it kind of, like, got broken apart. And one of the questions that I've had is, has the topology of the lands between shifted because of the shattering? And if so, well, I mean, it's been confirmed that it has based off of the Mount Gelmir map description. But if the shattering can influence the landscape of the lands between, could mending the ring influence the topology of the lands between? And if so, does that mean Radagon becoming Elden Lord also changed the landscape? Does that mean when Godfrey became Elden Lord, that changed the landscape? I think these are all very strong possibilities, depending on how canonical one wants to take the paintings of the Erd Tree, because there is one of the Erd Tree, like, next to, like, a bunch of cliffs that has no Lane Dell next to it, that has, like, nothing that looks like Altus Plateau or the mountaintops next to it. And that painting could have been, like, more representative of, like, the birth of the Erd Tree, where these features may not have really existed in the lands at that time. But we don't really know, and it could just be some artist's rendition of what the Erd Tree could have looked like if they'd, like, never seen it except from a distance. I don't know. What do we make of Empyrean hounds being related to the Empyreans anyway? I think that might be a fingers thing, just because it doesn't seem as though Mikola and or Melania have hounds in the traditional sense, but there might be some other things at play with their existence. Zeit says, Farum Azula is definitely connected. Completing the Ring of the Lands Between, is this even in contention? Yes, it's absolutely in contention. The question you should ask yourself is there anything that's not in contention? And then you should kick yourself for asking that question, because literally everything is in contention. Everybody contends everything all the time. All right, Elden Enthusiast, you have a good one.
Azula chunks are vital to solving this puzzle. One thing to note is that the underground regions do not show any Farum Azula ruins at all. This shows that if the Eternal Cities were ever on the surface, they were probably sent underground before the Lands Between had contact with the Farum Azula civilization. It is important to make a distinction here. We do see chunks of Farum Azula which fell off from the floating city when it was shattered, struck by a meteorite, presumably. But we also see in the Lands Between Farum Azula style structures in Lanedell and Grail's Dragon Barrow. These did not fall from the city, but were rather built by Farum Azulans who came to the Lands Between.
And for what it's worth, the Farum Great Bridge also has the depiction of what I call, like, the sun or sunflower type thing that you can also see in Castle Sol when you fight Commander Neil and whatnot. It's, like, right up there.
Fall from the city, but were rather built by Farum Azulans who came to the Lands Between. What's odd is that we see no Farum Azula ruins near these Farum Azula style structures, even though the Bestial Sanctum and Upper Lanedell show architectural evidence of Farum Azulan cultural influence. The ruins of Farum Azula itself are on the other side of the continent. It becomes even stranger when we explore the catacombs. As many lore hunters have already discovered, the catacombs were not built in Marika's time, but rather repurposed from a previous regime. In nearly every catacomb, we see sarcophagi made in the Farum Azulan style. So some Farum Azulan people were interred here, or perhaps those ruled by them or associated.
And then one question which might challenge a lot of this, and this is just kind of like not something that I'm like positing seriously, would be, could these sarcophagi in the catacombs or the catacombs themselves predate Farum Azula? I think most people would be against it because just the general idea would be that people evolved from beasts or beastmen, but we don't really know if that's actually the case, despite the way that some things are presented in the game. Because if Newman came from an outside world, could there have been humanoids that existed in a parallel fashion to the Beastmen? And could they have built these catacombs before the Beastmen gained their five-finger style intelligence? Perhaps. We don't really know. So, like I said, I don't really fully buy this idea here. I'm just kind of playing a little bit of devil's advocate.
Associated with them in some way. So, we have Farum Azulan structures in the east, fallen Farum Azula ruins in the west, and Farum Azulan burial rituals everywhere. It goes without saying that this vastly complicates any attempt to find the original location of Farum Azula, if it was on the lands between at all. Let's look at several popular theories of Farum Azula's original location. As has been observed by many lore hunters, the 6 divine towers form a hexagon around a very conspicuous cloud at the center of this sea, in the middle of the lands between. Many have suggested this was perhaps the location of Farum Azula when it was on land. If we examine the footprint of Farum Azula, we see numerous bridges of varying sizes, radiating from a central hub. The architectural style of Farum Azula emphasizes concentric circular designs and circular buildings. The bridges which connect Farum Azula to the outside could have connected to the Divine Towers. But the Divine Towers themselves don't appear to have any parts broken off, or show any indication a bridge had extended toward the sea. Also, the respective styles of the towers and Farum Azula bridges don't match up at all. The Divine Towers were most likely built by the Giants, or other culture allied to them. This is a completely different style and set of materials from those used to construct Farum Azula. So at this
There's a couple things here. I don't necessarily disagree with what he's saying, but I just want to bring up some other things that might be of interest, in that whether or not the Giants created the pillars is contentious. I think there's a good case to be made for it, but there's also the odd golem builders civilization that we know like literally nothing about, essentially, that could have done it. Those could have been the Giants for all we know. That's worth considering, but whatever, I'm just throwing that out there. One thing which I don't think too many people talk about with the whole hexagon idea here. Where is it? Okay. One reason I don't like this theory with the way that it's currently presented is I think it misses how some of the Divine Towers seem to have shifted from where they were. Now, what I mean by that is, if you look at the fortified manor, you've got some random bridge going off and breaking off and not connecting to anything, which means that if the bridge connected to its Divine Tower originally, that the placement of the Divine Tower where it is now is not where it used to be. And so that means that the current formation of the hexagon is not historically accurate, and that could impact where Farum Azula is and or should have been on the timeline in the past. So that could influence it. So maybe it's supposed to be over the ocean, but maybe in a slightly different spot. And it's so strange to me they have a random Divine Tower over here next to like the cliff, and then another one's bridge like right next to it, which connects to the isolated Divine Tower, if I'm remembering correctly. So anyway, it's really vexing. Can I show you? Show you what? I'm sorry. The bridge that I'm talking about? The one next to the fortified manor? I wonder if I have a good screenshot of it offhand. Divine Tower? Alright, so these are the Lanedell Ramparts. So this is a Divine Tower, but this is not the Divine Tower which connects into the fortified manor's bridge. So the fortified manor bridge that I'm talking about is when you go to Weeping Peninsula and go to the Tower of Return. It'll teleport you into Lindell, right next to the Round Table Hold, the fortified manor, but you can't access it. If you take the warp pad that's on that divine bridge, that one sends you to the isolated divine tower, which is way this way. Like that's not it, but anyway, it's like way down here. And from that one, you can see Farum Azula for whatever reason. The bridge and location to the tower. So hold on. Stormvale. Nope. Okay, I do have a picture. So this is the Lindell Divine Tower Bridge. So this is the no, that's actually the Colosseum. This is the fortified manor. That's Grand Sax, obviously. But the bridge is broken over the ramparts. And this should have connected to a divine tower. But if it did, it's unclear whether that divine tower is this one, or if it's actually supposed to be the isolated one way off in the ocean. So that's the Limgrave Divine Tower. No, not Limgrave. Caelid Divine? No, this is Caelid. This is Liurnia. Altus. And then, yeah, okay. Nope, wrong one. Yeah, I wonder if I have a better vantage point for you offhand. I don't think I do, or if I do, it's not labeled very well. Not labeled like this. All right, no. Manor? Bridge? Maybe that will work. Yeah, I don't think I just have like a good picture of that one specifically. But it's got the golem on it. If each tower had a portal to the city, it'd make more sense. That'd be even yeah, okay. I was gonna say more wild, but then I was thinking of like the chest, and that's not actually like a real teleporter. Anyway. It's too bad most, if not all of the towers' bridges are basically broken. Lands Between need better maintenance workers. They really do. Those golems are just kind of like laying inert instead of doing their jobs.
Been observed by many lore hunters, the 6 divine towers form a hexagon around a very conspicuous cloud at the center of the bridge head extended toward the sea. Azula emphasizes concentric circular designs and circular buildings. The bridges which connect Farum Azula to the outside could have connected to the divine towers. But the divine towers themselves don't appear to have any parts broken off, or show any indication a bridge had extended toward the sea. Also,
There's the one that I talked about at the fortified manor, but generally speaking, he is correct here, yes.
respective styles of the towers and Farum Azula bridges don't match up at all. The divine towers were most likely built by the giants, or other culture allied to them. This is a completely different style and set of materials from those used to construct Farum Azula. So at this point, I have to say Farum Azula likely was not at the center of the Lands Between's inland sea. Still, the cloud at the center of the map is intriguing. Seems almost deliberately put there to obscure something. For now, we can only speculate.
That sounds like such a lore brain take. There's a cloud there, it's obscuring what we can see, but I mean, maybe it's just art. Maybe not, who knows. DLC will fix everything, right guys? Theory 2, off the east coast of the Lands Between.
The next suggestion we often see is Farum Azula situated on the east of the Lands Between. We do find evidence of Farum Azulan people coming and building the Bestial Sanctum and 2 bridges in Grail's Dragon Barrow. Also, we see a mass grave in the northern part of this region, where the corpses of beastmen are embedded in stone, and the entire area is under constant rain and wind. While this area shows definite connections to Farum Azula, we do not see any ruins from Farum Azula itself. All the chunks from the actual city are on the other side of the continent. If Farum Azula was connected to the east of the Lands Between, wouldn't we see rubble in this area? But we don't. This complicates the theory. We've also heard it suggested that Farum Azula occupied what is now the Wailing Dunes. It does appear like a chunk of the landmass had been removed somehow, leaving the desert we see today.
So one concern I have about these ideas in general is that it almost presupposes that all of Farum Azula and its architecture were contained in specific areas, which, kind of makes a certain degree of sense, but I think is shown that that isn't the only way that things can be. For example, although the eternal cities and whatnot are kind of underground and more focused around like kind of no, sorry, not kind of Limgrave, but kind of like Liurnia and kind of under Caelid. You still have Nox, essentially eternal city descendant settlements in Caelid with Celia, and you also have the liturgical city or liturgical town or Ordina, whatever you want to call it, in the consecrated snowfields. And beyond that, you have arguably Nox towers on every section of the continent, with the ones where you get like the Black Moon talismans, the memory stones, so that like increase your spell slots. And you can see them in Weeping Peninsula, Liurnia, Limgrave, Caelid. Wait, are there? Yeah, there's definitely one in Caelid at the northeast, above the Minor Erd Tree. Altus Plateau has the Mirage Tower, and you've got the Albinoric Tower in the snowfields. So the relics of a particular civilization don't need to be located in one area only. So it is possible that Farum Azula could have been someplace else on the map, and the whole Bestial Sanctum could have been its own thing. There is that likeness between Castle Souls, Sunflower depiction type thing, as well as the Farum Great Bridge. Beyond that, there's also the fact that you've got the Chloranthy style design, which appears in the cobblestones of Farum Azula, reappearing in Lane Dell in the Erd Tree Sanctuary and whatnot, which of course is just a reused asset from Dark Souls 3, which can be found in the Consumed King's Garden and Archdragon Peak and all that whatnot. Maybe Farum was everywhere? Exactly, there you go. You guess those are Nox? That's contentious, because, everything's contentious, but let's go back.
The area would definitely fit the footprint of Farum Azula, but again, the ruins we find here are giant ruins, not Farum Azulan. We find another inconclusive result. This is a less often suggested location, but I think it bears consideration. The west of the Lands Between is where we find the majority of ruins from the city itself. Around the Chapel of Anticipation, there's an anemic version of the storm at the center of Farum Azula. There are also numerous references to a true storm, which once raged in or around the area known as Storm Hill. Those who have watched my other videos know my theories about the Stormhawk clan, its relation to Stormvale Castle, and how I think the storm came to be in Farum Azula. I won't reiterate these theories here, suffice to say that the shared association with storms makes this area a viable location for Farum Azula. There is even a Beastman of Farum Azula boss we can encounter in a nearby cave. But we run into the same issues as we do.
And that's like one of the things that I would enjoy more in a game like Dark Souls, where there aren't so many overly reused enemies and assets, where there's more plausible deniability that the enemies and bosses were more deliberately placed. And so, I think I phrased that wrong, but anyway, yeah. Well, it might be relevant that the Beastman of Farum Azula can be found down there. It's just because so much of Elden Ring is reused, it just makes it a little bit more difficult for me to believe it. Maybe my man's just fell from the sky ruins and just kind of hobbled on into a cave, but who really knows? Stormvale's connection to Farum Azula is deeply troubling to your mental health, and how?
Do elsewhere. While we see pieces of Farum Azula, which actually fell from the city, we don't see any Farum Azulan structures that were actually built here. All the ruins of old civilizations is either giant, old dynasty, or Nox inspired. There also isn't anywhere along the west coast which shows evidence of a massive amount of land uprooting itself from the earth, at least not in any localized area. If we go north to the region of Mount Gelmir, we find this odd whirlpool in the ocean, drawn on the map in a very conspicuous way.
I don't know if I would give that kind of whirlpool any real significance, because if you go up to any of the like coastline and look out there, it's not like you get a 3D whirlpool with a little sea monster in it either, or a log. What was I gonna say before this? Oh yeah, the land. So I think there's a really good possibility. I guess hold on, let me back it up.
It's not in any localized area. If we
Oh, he just cut. Okay, so I think there's a really good possibility that Liurnia could have like sunk off more from the Gelmir region, or Gelmir got shot more into the sky after the shattering, and that like the continent could just be like breaking apart a bit more. And I think the whole idea of the continents breaking apart could be a byproduct of the shattering, just kind of like makes a lot of thematic sense. That once the ring got shattered, even the lands became shattered. But again, we don't really know. We should keep a last protagonist, we don't really know counter for the stream, just because I feel like it's my freaking motto talking about Elden Ring lore at this point. I think, sorry, your question to me is, you might think, how is the question, but how is the answer? It is what's troubling. Maybe Farum was in mountains and Caelid. So yeah, I do think there's a very good chance that parts of Liurnia were more directly connected into Caelid and the consecrated snowfield section of the map. And that doesn't seem very intuitive at first, but also when you go underneath the Shifa River area, you got a bunch of trees which line up with the consecrated snowfield trees. You also got like the random ass dragonkin soldiers, which were said to have been born underground, unless those descriptions meant like specifically the dragonkin soldiers you got those weapons from were born underground. But it's really annoying. A lot of Elden Ring lore just actually doesn't make sense when you really start peeling away the layers. You don't cross the Farum Great Bridge to go anywhere else but Farum? Maybe it's named after Farum. Sometimes whirlpools just be whirlpools, bro. Okay, you got me.
we go north to the region
But it
of
has a cigar. It has a cigar in it.
Mount Gelmir, we find this odd whirlpool in the ocean, drawn on the map in a very conspicuous way. There is an object at the center of this whirlpool, which looks somewhat like a tree root. As far as I know, there are no item descriptions or writings about this at all, and Mount Gelmir itself doesn't show any signs of Farum Azula history. Each area which seems promising has several strikes against it. This remains an open question. We also have to wonder why every catacomb in the lands between happens to have Farum Azula's sarcophagi. It could be asset reuse, or we can imagine in ancient times before the Erd Tree, when Farum Azula was in its heyday, people from there traveled far and wide, and if they died, were interred according to their culture's traditions. This shows that Farum Azula has been in contact with the lands between for a rather long time, since before the age of the Erd Tree, possibly. Yet
So one of the weirder things about Farum Azula is that although they do definitely have sarcophagi and the beastmen kind of like guard them to a degree, we've also got beastmen hung from trees. So this is going to be a weird question. Could sarcophagi burial have been specifically reserved for more humanoid beings? Question mark? I don't know. That's something I haven't really entertained myself before either, before just posing that right now.
even with this widespread influence, we still have no idea where the floating city may have actually been situated. Though we do see Farum Azula burial rituals in the catacombs and elsewhere in the lands between, if we go deeper, we don't see any evidence. The underground regions of the lands between appear to have no Farum Azula ruins anywhere. Some people may think this is a rather trivial point, but I think it's important to talk about. If the Eternal Cities and their old civilization cousins represent the oldest ruins on the lands between, we can comfortably say that Farum Azula, or the lands between's relationship to this city, is not older than the Eternal Cities, that these regions represent a pre-Farum Azula lands between, up until the creation of the catacombs.
So that's a pretty spicy lore take. I don't necessarily disagree with it. I have wondered whether or not the old dynasty has predated Farum Azula, or if it predates Farum Azula, whether or not they were kind of collateral. No, definitely not consanguineous. Um, anyway, whether or not they were like kind of neighbors as far as like the timeline goes, because it wouldn't surprise me if the Claymen came from a time when the dragons were still technically like rulers and whatnot, but they were just kind of off doing their own thing, minding their own business, and maybe the dragons didn't really care what the hell everybody else was doing anyway. Is sewer slide? Oh, okay. Without Horn says, sorry, just thinking about some beast man going, I'm gonna about to die, so I'm gonna travel to the mountains of the giants. So they have to build me a sarcophagus all the way up there. So that's actually kind of interesting idea, although you didn't phrase it quite this way. It would be really funny if they rode the sarcophagi up to Farum Azula, similarly to the way that sarcophagi could travel upriver or upstream to the Eternal Cities. Anyway, yeah. Now that just makes me like want to reconsider like the implications of these coffins traveling upstream. I think it has to do with Erdtree burial, but maybe there's more to it. I think the dog just farted. Anyway,
There is also the strange redundancy surrounding the events of Farum Azula's ruin and the destruction of the Eternal City. Both of these civilizations were evidently hit by an Astel meteorite. Yet I think the complete lack of Farum Azula ruins in the underground rules out the possibility that it was the same Astel meteorite which destroyed both. These must have been different meteorites at different times. The flora and fauna of Farum Azula bears mentioning. Many creatures from the lands between appear here, including stormhawks, dogs, and the worm faces. The vegetation, though, is far more interesting. Most of the trees look the same as those from the lands between, except they look strangely drained of color, burnished like bronze, as if they were once gold.
so not. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were drained of color. I mean, some of them definitely are, but those ones are distinctly more gray. But yeah, there's more to say about that. Damn it, he said something else. Oh yeah. I definitely disagree with the idea that it could have been an Estelle, or that it was an Estelle that hit Farum Azula. We just don't have enough info to say about that one way or the other. But I suppose technically it is a possibility.
The deciduous and conifer trees we see in Farum Azula are the same models as those in the lands between. This could indicate a previous connection or simple asset reuse.
And while they do share kind of the same model, they do have different degrees of coloration. So in the lands between, they tend to be like really kind of dark brown. Some of them are gray here, like down there you can definitely tell. And others are like a more burnished red than the kind of browns that you would see in the lands between. I think I have pictures of all of this. I don't actually know if I have it labeled. Tree. Or if not, trees. Or sorry, if not pictures, I should have a little bit of footage. Because I did look at some of this stuff a bit more deeply. But this stuff isn't necessarily just native to Farum Azula. So they look a little bit more orange here. Oh, there's the green. So yeah, we got some of the gray stuff, which I was mentioning there. We got some more red stuff, although that's like more shadows for like the deciduous trees. And this is just a bad angle. And that's like one of the harder things to work with the lighting sometimes. So yeah, this is kind of like a brownish color, maybe a little bit more burnished. Maybe this does match what you can see in the rest of the lands between. But anyway, yeah, those leaves are more orange. But if you go to Lane Dell, and go next to the fortified manor specifically, you've got similar style leaves going on here, which I think this is meant to be indicative of these trees being older than the Erd tree and it's more yellow influence, but that'll be like saved for like a video eventually, which I promised like a couple months ago and still haven't gotten around to doing. And just to give a bit more reference, the rest of Langdell's trees are definitely more orange instead of a reddish orange. Orange, you glad I didn't say banana? Maybe it was just in fall when they went beyond time. I don't necessarily think so because of the gray trees as well. Wait, no, this is a fortified manor. Give me a second. Farum Azula. So yeah, these are the more reddish trees. Let me see if I could find a good gray one for you. Oh, so we still have some green leaves occasionally in Farum Azula. So it's not entirely all fall. And then I know next to the Dragon Temple Sanctum's Site of Grace, I don't actually remember the name of the Site of Grace, but like would that be the third Site of Grace, technically speaking, or the second? The one beyond the big tornado, when you go in the sanctum and the dude starts shooting lightning at you, that one has a really good gray tree right next to it, which I thought I had a picture of. I'm pretty sure I do. I just don't think I've like labeled it. Or I mean, I might have labeled it, but I've just got so many pictures it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. Oh no, this is a good example. So this is one of the trees that's got like the hanged beasts on it, and it's definitely got like drained gray leaves, and as well as the orangey red ones, red orange ones. Okay, going back to the video.
Between. This could indicate a previous connection or simple asset reuse. There is this one unique tree model which appears to be in a state of partial petrification. These are the same trees we see elsewhere in Farum Azula inhabited by bestial skeletons. This could have some connection to the death root which has spread through the city, though this is a completely unique asset. There's also the cypress tree, another unique model we find in the parks and promenades. The worm faces are located in an area accessible by an elevator. They inhabit a lower part of the city, almost as if they have been quarantined off from everything else. They wear different clothing from those on the lands between. They are covered with seals, similar to the one on the back of Gurog's hand, which keeps the Black Blade in check. So while they are the same being as those on the mainland, they come from a different culture. It is possible the worm faces manifested in both areas independently. But the most fascinating aspect of Farum Azula's design are the aforementioned bridges which radiate from the central hub. The ends of these bridges broke off in the course of Farum Azula's destruction. If Farum Azula was ever connected to the lands between, we should see the remains of the other sides of these bridges somewhere. In other words, we should see a clear footprint of ruined bridges leading inward, but we don't see this anywhere in the lands between. Given the lack of conclusive evidence, I would like to put forward a theory.
So I do think it's a little bit unfair to take this as it looks right now. I think first one would need to rearrange the puzzle pieces of Farum Azula for like having like broken around and then try to do it. And even if they did that, I don't think that would still line up with anything else in the lands between very well for multiple reasons. Just because like you don't have like a bunch of abandoned bridges pretty much anywhere. So I think it's a little bit of a fool's errand to begin with. But setting all that aside, I still do think there's a very strong chance that the landscape of the lands between shifted violently after the shattering, which could have affected this stuff. But it is also very fascinating, not only the where Farum Azula was before its ruin, but the when it was before its ruin, which is another one of those things we don't have information about.
But Farum Azula was never connected to the lands between, but rather was situated on a different continent. Many descriptions mention areas outside the lands between, such as the Badlands, the Land of Reeds, and several other unnamed areas. The Draconian preset mentions a land of ancient dragons, where life is short. Farum Azula is, or was, famously ruled by the ancient dragons, so the city may have come from this area. We also have the description of the ancient dragon cult's prayer book, which implies that Farum Azula is outside the lands between. This description could be implying that Farum Azula was ruined so long ago that none lived to remember it, or it could mean Farum Azula was never a part of the lands between to begin with.
So that's one of those unfortunate artifacts of localization where it's more ambiguous in Japanese, where it says that it's a tome that is not told in the lands between, which doesn't mean that it was never told in the lands between and therefore like never reached the lands between. So it just seems like it's just been like a lost tome essentially. So nobody like really shares it anymore because it's lost. So yeah.
The war with the ancient dragons occurred far before the Shattering, when Godwin was still alive. I would also posit that Farum Azula may have been situated on an island off the coast of Limgrave. This would explain the ruins in that region. But there doesn't appear to be anything drawn on the map to indicate this, if the clues on the map mean anything at all. A lot of people may think of this as a cop-out, that we need a novel interpretation of the evidence to solve this riddle. But I think this theory explains much of what we see. While the ruined chunks of Limgrave came from the city itself, the Bestial Sanctum and the Farum Bridges were built by inhabitants of Farum Azula who emigrated to the lands between. To me, this is a better explanation for the lack of conclusive evidence of Farum Azula's location than saying the city was caught in a time warp or was banished from the timeline altogether. The conclusive evidence is on another continent. This has been the Elden Conspiracy, signing out.
So that's an interesting idea. I'm a little bit disappointed that there wasn't a little bit more to go with it. Right. So with, hold on, let's pull up the map if he's got it. So while I like this idea, I think one issue is even if you want to say that Farum Azula was on the west side, it still doesn't explain all the fragments and where they eventually ended up. Because you've got the one random one in Caelid, maybe that is just like the outlier. You got a ton of them over here. But a lot of them are just so far north in Liurnia that I feel like no matter where you put it, it just doesn't make sense. You could argue that like this true storm raged over Stormvale for a time. Maybe Farum Azula wanders in the sky, but with the way that the Golden Order and everything is now, maybe it stopped wandering. We don't really know. I really feel like I should keep a counter at this point. No, it would drive me crazy, but yeah. More Lore says, all the maps are in the same style. All of them included Farum ruins. The Giants one even includes Farum, and the maps are made after the Shattering because of Gelmir. Theory, the maps are made to charge the new landscape of the lands between after the Shattering. Sorry, that didn't make a lot of sense. To chart, okay. To chart the new landscape of the lands between after the Shattering. Okay, that makes more sense. Hey Drizzlam, welcome into the stream. Do I believe Commander Niall to be the Stormlord? My answer would be no, because if he was, that doesn't make a lot of sense that he used to be the subject of another lord. And that lord seemed to not be Godfrey for a variety of reasons. So I think for the candidates of the Stormlord, the most likely one right now, I think, would be Placidus Axe. Then following Placidus Axe, I think you could make the argument that it could have been Godfrey, as in like he inherited that title, but you know, that's very contentious and very dissatisfying for multiple reasons. But between those two, there is the odd connection of Sarash, and Sarash could have been the Stormlord, even though he was the Beast Lord. But we don't really know what Sarash was like in battle, which it kind of sucks that he got the way that he did. So maybe there were supposed to be more storm arts related to beasts and beastmen and Sarash that we just kind of lost. But setting all those aside, there is the possibility that the Stormlord could just be an unnamed entity. Whether that unnamed entity was the former ruler of Castle Morn is debatable as well. But for the little bit of information that we have in game right now, I feel like Placidusax is slightly more likely to have been the Stormlord than the others. If for no other reason than my man's literally turns into a storm throughout his fight and whatnot. And he's literally within the storm beyond time and whatnot. And I would disagree that the Stormhawk King was the Stormlord, because the Stormhawk King, at least for the Japanese, is more explicitly the Lord of all other hawks and not the Lord of all others, which is just kind of a really lamentable translation there. Yeah, no problem. Which one had a fake leg, Niall or O'Neill? Niall. So O'Neill is in Caelid. I'm pretty confident. Maybe I'm wrong. O'Neill's the one from Stargate. It's a giant manta ray. Yeah, you got me, Zite. The true Stormlord who exists beyond the storm is the giant manta ray with all the shadow men who worship him. Even with the Japanese translation, you'd still believe it's the Hawk King. I would disagree, just because like the Hawk King shows that it's subservient to others. Although maybe that's why it can be subservient to what's her face, to Nefelilu, because if the Stormlord in the Hawk King got defeated by Godfrey and pledged servitude to Godfrey and his line, then that could be extended to Nefeli through the transitive property. I don't know. Niall is just a good Fist of the North Star reference, and if he is the Hawk, then perfect. Falco of Gold. I've watched Fist of the North Star, but I don't remember who Niall is. Morlor is 100% certain both commanders used to be one boss, and they would drop remembrances that would have the prosthetic and halberd. I'm gonna 100% disagree with you and say that both commanders were essentially just a repurposing of a cut Bloodborne enemy. Let's go ahead and pull that up just for the memes of it. Bloodborne cut enemies. You want the real Commander O'Neill? Or Niall? Here he is right here. Oh no. The Nameless Canehurst Knight. Oh, this kind of sucks. Alright, there we go. There's your commander. Complete with dragon on the helmet. the OG banished knight. With the peg leg and everything. Get wrecked. Not really. Okay, so that will wrap up the stream for tonight. Oh yeah, let's finish like the last. No, I backed up. We already finished it all. So I'm gonna go ahead and link our Elden Conspiracy Friends video into chat if you want to leave them a like and or a sub. You're more than welcome to do so. You couldn't get past 4 or 5 episodes of Fist of the North Star. So the original anime is definitely a much slower pace with much less production value that they could have devoted to the actual animation, so I don't blame you. Already upvoted at some point? Sweet. Season 2, he cuts off his own leg. It's a sacrifice to Raoh? Wouldn't that be way later? He could beat Raoh, but Raoh's forces would run wild and be worse without him. So Falco compromises? Man, I just don't remember. I felt like Raoh took so long to get to. I actually don't know like the seasons and whatnot. Just kind of like binged watched them years and years ago. Alright. So anyway, that'll be it for tonight's stream, everybody. Thank you so much for dropping by. I will figure out what videos I'm going to watch tomorrow and whatnot. Stay tuned for when I like make the whole like Lies of P gameplay announcement and whatnot official. It'll be in the pretty near future and whatnot. I just need to get my ducks in a row, as they say, and all that. Alright, so that'll be it for me. Take care, stay safe. We will be going live again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope to see you then. Last Protagonist out.